Chapter 11:11. Northern Road, Ruwa-Suwa County. This was the border between Shanin Road and the Japanese Empire's capital, Ping and Beijing, was in the south. They took their time along the way. Originally, they could have finished the journey in 8 to 10 days. However, with Shan Tianya leading the way, they walked for 11 days. When night came, he was in the temporary military tent with a worried face. The provisions that they brought could only last for 4 days. Once this news was spread, the morale of the 50,000 soldiers would be immediately disrupted. At that time, no one dared to imagine what would happen. At this moment, Fukada Tani felt like an abandoned child. He had a home but could not return. He had become a rootless tree. It was already late at night. Outside the tent, only the sound of patrolling soldiers could be heard. Fukada Tani was still standing in front of the map with a worried face. This time, they had to deal with the 5-star army. The shadow of the previous failure had not completely dissipated. Thinking of the power of the cannons and the bravery of the cavalry, he did not even have a 10% chance of winning. Although Ashikaga Yoshimasa had told him that the 5-star army had already attacked Nanhai Road, there should not be many soldiers left in Ping and Beijing. However, Fukada Tani did not think this way. King Wunan of Damyang was in Ping and Beijing. How could he not leave some elite soldiers by his side? Not to mention other things, just leaving some firearms behind would be enough to stop them from advancing. It was true that there were 50,000 soldiers, but he knew better than anyone else what kind of quality they were. If they were fighting a smooth battle, they might have some skills. However, once they met a strong enemy, these people would probably run away. Such a strong opponent was actually sent to fight, and only 50,000 weak soldiers. This made Fukada Tani want to curse. He suspected that this was Ashikaga Yoshimasa's plan to kill with a borrowed knife. Everything was because he lost Ping and Beijing, as well as a large amount of gold, silver, and provisions. But who could be blamed for all this? He believed that even if the great general had been in Ping and Beijing, he would have chosen to avoid him. Thinking of this, Fukada Tani couldn't help but sigh helplessly. What made Kuin Fukada so worried in the middle of the night? The voice that suddenly sounded from within the large tent seemed so out of place in the silent night, yet it was also so clear that it could be heard. In an instant, Fukada Tani felt goosebumps all over his body. Out of instinct, he couldn't help but yell, "Who is it? Is it a human or a ghost?" Seeing Fukada Tani's big reaction, a person walked out from a corner of the tent and said with a smile, "Kuin Fukada, don't be nervous. An old friend has come to see you." Borrowing the dim candlelight in the tent, Fukada Tani was finally able to clearly see the person who had arrived. He then said, "So it's Kuin Matsumoto. Aren't you? Aren't you?" Seeing that Fukada Tani had finally reacted, Matsumoto Kazuma laughed and came to less than 2 meters in front of him. He said, "Yes, I've already defected to the 5-star army, but we're still friends, aren't we? We had the same experience. We were both abandoned by Ashikaga Yoshimasa, weren't we?" Matsumoto Kazuma's entry point was very good. He found the same experience that both of them had. Back then, he was also one of the people that the great general valued the most. However, when he didn't complete his mission well, he was met with a bloody massacre. If it wasn't for the 5-star army saving him, he would have already been a dead man. Fukada Tani was the same. As a former famous person, he wasn't a nobody. Because he held a portion of the military power, he was also one of the people that the great general roped in. However, after the death of the emperor, the great general's strength grew again and again. His strength was no longer in the great general's eyes. Especially after losing Ping and Beijing, he didn't have a good day. He was always in fear and didn't know when the great general would come to find trouble with him. Now, it was even better. He brought 50,000 weak soldiers to battle. What he had to face was the 5-star army, which was known as the strongest in the world. This was clearly an act of seeking death. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was an abandoned child. On the contrary, it was very appropriate. In a way, the two of them were both abandoned children. In the past, they were very familiar with each other. Now that they had the same experience and met again, they had a lot of feelings and even a sense of identity. This was one of the reasons why Yang Chendong sent Matsumoto Kazuma to carry out the mission. Two people who had the same experience would always have more things to talk about. Not to mention, with Matsumoto Kazuma's ability, once things went wrong, it wouldn't be easy to make him stay. This gave the matter a 30% chance of success. When others said that he was an abandoned child, Fukada Tani would more or less defend himself. It was also possible that he would accuse the other party of slander. If it was Matsumoto Kazuma who said this, he wouldn't have any doubts. Everyone was too familiar with each other. There were some things that really didn't need to be explained. Another sigh came from Fukada Tani's mouth. He didn't expect that the two of them would meet in such a situation. Moreover, they were both abandoned children. The past could only be recalled and reminisced. People still had to face reality. After all, Fukada Tani was a famous person. He had some strategies. He quickly threw away the unhappiness in his heart and said, "Kuin Matsumoto, you came here in the middle of the night. Presumably, you want to kill me. Hee, it's fine. Dying in the hands of an old friend isn't a regrettable thing. I just have to trouble you to make your move quickly and let me suffer less." The two of them didn't have the same standpoint. They were no longer friends and had become enemies. They also knew Matsumoto Kazuma's ability. It was impossible to resist. Fukada Tani simply accepted his fate. After he finished speaking, he closed his eyes and looked like he was waiting for death. Fukada Tani didn't even resist. This was somewhat out of Matsumoto Kazuma's expectations. However, when he thought about how even if he didn't kill him, when faced with the powerful 5-star army, there wouldn't be much of an outcome, he felt relieved. It was just that this time he didn't come to kill, so he deliberately pretended to be surprised and asked, "Kuin Fukada, why do you say that? We are friends. How could I come to kill you?" "Oh, you didn't come to kill me?" Fukada Tani opened his eyes at this moment. In fact, when Matsumoto Kazuma appeared and didn't immediately attack him, he could feel that the other party didn't really want to kill him. Otherwise, he could have just attacked directly. Just now, he was just putting on an act to show that even if he died, he wouldn't call for people to attack his former friend. Of course, as a friend, not only will I not harm Kuin Fukada, but I will also save you this time. Since he said this, Matsumoto Kazuma didn't hesitate. He told him that King Wunan of Daemyeong originally wanted to kill him, but after he found out, he pleaded for mercy and said that he would personally go and persuade him. At the same time, he also told him that he would give Fukada Tani a way out. According to Matsumoto Kazuma's words, Fukada Tani was still a very capable person. This kind of person shouldn't be abandoned and die as cannon fodder. He should display his value. So he came. Fukada Tani naturally wouldn't believe Matsumoto Kazuma's words so easily. He even suspected that this was King Wunan of Daemyeong's intention. However, there was no point in dwelling on this now. The most important thing was to know that he was still useful and didn't have to die. This was the most important thing. Immediately, he pretended to be very grateful and said, "Kuin Matsumoto is very considerate, but I don't know what King Wunan of Daemyeong wants me to do." Matsumoto Kazuma, who had prepared a lot of things to say, didn't expect things to go so smoothly. This made him a little surprised. But after all, it was a good thing. He immediately said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon hopes that Kuin Fukada can repent and be saved. In the current situation, it's only a matter of time before Ashikaga Yoshimasa is destroyed. What we need to do is to make the right choice in life. For example, we need to rely on Bugnam of Gojoseon and the 5-star army." "Will they accept us?" Kuin Fukada asked without hesitation. He wasn't playing any tricks. With his current status, he really didn't have any other choice. Since the Grand General had already abandoned him, he might as well save himself. Although his future was still uncertain, at least he could live for a few more days, right? Of course they will. I have already convinced Bugnam of Gojoseon, and Bugnam of Gojoseon also said that as long as Kuin Fukada can show enough sincerity, the 5-star army is willing to accept you. When the time comes, high positions and generous salaries will be waiting for us in front of us. Matsumoto Kazuma seemed to be getting more and more excited as he spoke. It was as if everything would go smoothly if they relied on Yang Chendong. Really? That's great. Fukada Tani also said very cooperatively, but then the excitement on his face disappeared. "But Kuin Matsumoto, I'm afraid that you don't know my current situation. Right now, My rations can only last for 4 days. Once I don't have enough rations, I'm afraid that there will be a mutiny in the army. At that time, even if I want to rely on the 5-star army, I'm afraid that I won't have the strength and time to do so. That was a condition he was proposing. Since they were going to surrender, they should at least get something in return. Otherwise, why would they listen to their commands and work for them? A 50,000 army only had 4 days of rations. This was the first time Matsumoto Kazuma heard of this, but it didn't matter. Before he came, Yang Chendong had given him a lot of support. So after hearing this, he didn't panic too much. Instead, he laughed and said, "Kuan Fukada doesn't need to be so distressed. If you don't have rations, we can buy them." Oh right, this time, Bugnam of Gojoseon, in order to welcome Kuan Fukada, specially asked me to bring 500,000 taels of silver. It is now in a forest 10 miles away from the camp. If you need it, you can go and get it at any time. The Dafei kingdom was finally destroyed, and the silver mine on the island was also taken by Yang Xie. This greatly reduced the need for silver. With money, Yang Chendong naturally had more confidence. What he used to do against the Japanese Empire was to use money to pave the way. This was to preserve his strength to the greatest extent. Chapter 11:12. When Fukada Tani heard that he had to spend money to buy food, he wanted to laugh coldly. If there really was money, then what else could he say? However, before he could complain, he heard the words 500,000 taels of silver. He immediately froze on the spot. Then, he widened his eyes and asked in disbelief, 500,000 taels of silver? Is this true? It was no wonder that Fukada Tani was so excited. At this time, the money used in the Japanese Empire was mostly Yongle Tongbao. The Yongle Tongbao coins with the words Ji and Mu on them were all made by the Japanese Empire. After Ashikaga Yoshimasa took control of the currency, he began to reform it. The copper used in the currency was almost completely gone, replaced by other things. The Yongle Tongbao coins were originally one of the most exquisite currencies in China's history. However, the Yongle Tongbao coins that appeared in the Japanese Empire were extremely crude and had no value. They no longer had any purchasing power, and even the commoners didn't recognize them. Since the commoners didn't recognize them, there was almost no use for them. The most hateful thing was that the money that Ashikaga Yoshimasa gave to the generals was still the same. This was equivalent to letting the horse run and not letting the horse eat grass. However, it was precisely because he had no money and no food that he was able to control the various armies and make them work for him. Currently, Fukada Tani had a large amount of crude and worthless Yongle Tongbao coins in his hands. If the commoners didn't recognize them, how could they buy food? This was one of the reasons why he was worried. However, now that he heard that there was 500,000 taels of silver, it was no wonder that his eyes lit up. All of Fukada Tani's actions were seen by Matsumoto Kazuma. He immediately said, "Of course it's true. Why would I lie about such an important matter? If you don't believe me, we can go to the forest 10 li away and get the money." Okay. Fukada Tani didn't try to hide anything. In his opinion, nothing was more important than money. Silver was only silver when it was held in one's hands. Immediately, Fukada Tani sent someone to summon his own guards. A group of over 100 people left the camp in the middle of the night and headed straight for the forest 10 li away. Fukada Tani trusted Matsumoto Kazuma so much because he knew that if Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to kill him, there was no need to beat around the bush. If Matsumoto Kazuma wanted to kill him, he could have killed him just now. The truth did not disappoint him. Sure enough, he found 10 large chests, each of which contained 50,000 taels of silver. After checking, Fukada Tani was naturally satisfied. Together with Matsumoto Kazuma and the guards, they carried the 10 large boxes back to the barracks. When they returned, it was already dawn. Many soldiers had already left their tents and were preparing to eat breakfast. Coincidentally, one of the chests had been knocked over on the ground. When the dazzling silver fell to the ground, it immediately attracted a lot of attention. Soon after, the news spread and Fukada Tani's 500,000 taels of silver was known by everyone. When they returned to the main tent, Fukada Tani had already changed from his previous dispirited state to that of excitement. What Matsumoto Kazuma said next made him even more excited. Kurin Fukada, I have a plan that can save us 500,000 taels of silver and get enough food. But I don't know if I have the guts to do it. Oh? What plan? With 500,000 taels of silver in front of him, Fukada Tani no longer had any doubts about Matsumoto Kazuma. He immediately asked eagerly. Knowing that the time was right, Matsumoto Kazuma did not intend to keep him in suspense. He immediately spoke of his idea. It was very simple. It was to snatch food. Snatching food was a common thing for rebel armies. But to Fukada Tani, who had 50,000 soldiers, it would be very difficult to gather enough food by snatching food from the commoners. This was because the commoners would not foolishly leave their food at home. Instead, they would hide it. Moreover, without enough accurate information, not only would they not be able to snatch enough food, it was very likely that they would anger the commoners and lead to a chaotic battle, damaging their own strength. Thus, this was not something that an ordinary army would be willing to do. However, if they were to snatch food from other armies, the effect would be completely different. Since they were both armies, their food would naturally be gathered together. There would be no need to search everywhere, and they would be able to gather large amounts of food to solve their urgent needs. Matsumoto Kazuma's idea of snatching food was to snatch food from other armies. After he spoke of his idea, Fukada Tani nodded continuously until he finally laughed out loud. After an hour, the various junior generals who were waiting outside the main tent were finally allowed to enter. Previously, these junior generals looked down on Fukada Tani. Some of them had even thought about where they would run to once the war started. But now, with the temptation of 500,000 taels of silver, everyone's mentality had completely changed. Money could make the world go round, let alone ordinary people. Fukada Tani was also watching everyone who entered the tent. When he saw that their mental state had completely changed, and many of them even looked at him with flattering eyes, he was indescribably happy. At this moment, he finally felt like he was in charge of an army. After waiting for all the junior generals to enter the tent, Fukada Tani, who was sitting at the head of the table, finally opened his mouth and said, "All right, since everyone is here, then there are some things that I can tell you directly. We are a deserted army. Everyone knows that, right? How could everyone not know about this matter?" Because of this, everyone couldn't help but nod their heads. However, there were some who didn't understand why the general would suddenly say such words. What was his intention? What we are going to face next is the 5-star army, an army that has the advantage of powerful firearms. Everyone knows that, right? In exchange, everyone still nodded their heads. They were even more confused about Fukada Tani's intention. Facing such an opponent, we are equivalent to sending ourselves to death. Does anyone have any objections? Still, everyone nodded their heads in unison. Therefore, Fukada Tani revealed his true intention. Since we know that we are going to die, then as the commander, how can I watch everyone die? Therefore, I have decided that we will not attack Ping and Beijing. We will turn to the Shanin Road and attack the Maori regularization. The grain in his hands will be our target this time. That's right, this was the idea that Matsumoto Kazuma gave to Fukada Tani. The so-called snatching of grain was to snatch the grain of the Maori regularization's 100,000 soldiers that were heading to the Shanin Road. Similarly, the Maori regularization was under the command of the great general. Not only were the soldiers composed of young adults, but their grain was also very abundant. If they could snatch their grain, then it would definitely solve the problem of their own grain being depleted. At the same time, it was tantamount to showing loyalty to Bugnam of Gojoseon and making a contribution. It could be said that the 500,000 taels of silver were not taken for nothing. It could also be said that they had found a way out for themselves in the future. Fukada Tani's decision was heard by everyone. Naturally, they were very surprised. They also knew that the grain in the army could only last for 4 days. If they did not snatch the grain, they would not be able to survive. While everyone was still digesting this decision, Fukada Tani said something shocking again. He would take out 100,000 taels of silver as a reward for the army that performed the best in this battle. As soon as this was said, it immediately attracted everyone's interest. 100,000 taels of silver. For the Japanese army leaders who were used to hardship, it was definitely a large amount. For this, they were willing to give it a try. With the silver as a reward, this military meeting was very successful. Even in the main tent, the young generals were fighting over who would be the vanguard. In the end, it was Fukada Tani who made the decision that there was no priority for this battle. Whoever could snatch the most grain and bring it back would be the biggest winner and would be able to receive the 100,000 taels of silver as a reward. This was good. When the meeting was over, many of the young generals either secretly joined forces to increase their own strength or wanted to act alone and take all the food for themselves. There were even more who began to lead the troops as soon as they returned to their tents. It was as if they were afraid that if they were a step late, they would not be able to get any benefits. People say that interest is the best teacher. When a person wholeheartedly wanted to do something, there was nothing that could not be done or not done well. When everyone's initiative was completely aroused, the power that could be displayed was also amazing. 3 days later, Maori regularization, who was leading the main army towards Shanin Road and had continuously defeated Sensei Naganabu's army several times, suddenly received bad news. The grain of the rear army had been stolen by Fukada Tani's 50,000 weak troops. How is this possible? When he first heard the news, Maori regularization's face was full of disbelief. He did not believe that this army that was about to be abandoned still had such ability. Not only did they dare to make a move against him, but they could also really achieve their goal. However, no matter how much he did not believe it, the facts were right there. The news of the grain being stolen came one after another. There was even news of casualties. It was said that Fukada Tani's 50,000 weak troops were as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They displayed 120% of their strength and relied on numbers to defeat the elite Japanese army that was protecting the grain. In particular, these weak troops did not play by the rules at all. When they appeared, they swarmed like bees. When they attacked, they did not differentiate between the primary and secondary. It was completely chaotic. This made it so that even if one wanted to defend, they did not know how to defend. In any case, the grain being stolen and the loss of more than 3,000 soldiers was an irrefutable fact. Faced with the loss of the grain, Maori regularization had no choice but to suppress the decision to continue attacking Sensei Naganabu. He turned around and retreated. While reuniting with the rear army, he asked the Supreme General for help and grain. Fukada Tani's sudden attack had caught Ashikaga Yoshimasa off guard. Originally, this was a gift that he had prepared for Ping and Beijing. He did not expect that he would shoot himself in the foot. This made him so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. If it wasn't for the fact that the destruction of the Flatwell field was right in front of him, he would have led his army back and killed Fukada Tani. Chapter 11:13. When the news came, Yang Chendong breathed a sigh of relief. With the addition of this chaotic army, it was enough to make Ashikaga Yoshimasa suffer. Taking this opportunity, he turned his attention to the Battle of Nanhai Province. The attack on Ge Prefecture, which was close to Ping and Beijing, had already begun. With the new army commander Su He taking the lead, they were naturally victorious. Yang Chendong didn't need to worry about anything. He was more concerned about the Battle of Awaju Island and the reaction of the more than 300,000 Japanese naval division in Nanhai Province. Yang Chendong had set a 20-word policy for Nanhai Province's attack. The cavalry would attack the Vietnamese line, the navy would attack Awaju Island, the two sectors would be scorched earth, and Nanhai Province would be surrounded but not attacked. The first two sentences had already been completed, and the third sentence was also implemented in Shanin Province and Nanhai Province, which were adjacent to Nanhai Province. They would ensure that no civilians or grain would be seen within 50 li of the coast. The isolation of Nanhai Province's Japanese naval division was already very obvious. And if the Japanese army dared to enter within 50 li of the coast, the elite forces of the Cold Front, the extremely fast Cold 4th Division riding bicycles, would teach them a lesson. After all, the Japanese Empire's territory was still a bit small. The good thing was that it wasn't that difficult to defend. If it was the Great Ming Dynasty's coastline, not to mention one Cold Front division, even two Cold Front divisions would be far from enough. The scorched earthwork was completed. Next, it was time to see how long the Japanese army in Nanhai Province could last. Once the time was right, the C4th Division and C5th Division guarding this area would immediately launch an attack and take their lives. Of course, to achieve this result, it was far from something that could be done overnight. Right now, the main task was to attack Awaju Island. If they could successfully occupy this island, not only would they be able to completely isolate the Japanese naval division in Nanhai province, but they would also be able to withdraw most of their forces to attack Ji Prefecture. Thus, they could achieve the goal of ensuring the safety of Ping and Beijing. On Awaju Island, under the gaze of Yang Chundong, the commander of the 1st Division, Su Kuda, who was in charge of leading the troops, also tried his best to perform. 30 to 50,000 veterans were already a very powerful force to begin with. In addition, they had the support of the cavalry division of the new 3 armies, as well as the support of the 3 divisions. After they had landed on the Korean Navy's transport ships, they were able to display a very powerful force. The 50,000 Japanese soldiers were completely caught off guard and were forced to retreat again and again. Getting a good start didn't mean getting the final victory. On the battlefield, there were many examples of people who won first and then lost. Relying on their understanding of the terrain, as well as the rapid recruitment of new soldiers from the common people, the Japanese army on Awaju Island went from retreating step by step to standing on equal footing with the 5-star army. This was within Yang Chundong's expectations. According to the intelligence analysis of the Security Bureau and the CIA, the Navy was one of the most capable forces in the Japanese Empire. Perhaps they were rarely involved in civil wars, allowing them to maintain a detached attitude. Because of this, they had more time to train. If it weren't for the fact that their weapons and equipment were far inferior, even the 5-star Army's Navy wouldn't be able to gain any advantage over them. How could such an army be annihilated so easily? It was normal for them to be in a stalemate. Yang Chundong also knew that such a situation would not last long. After all, Awaju Island was now an isolated island. Without any reinforcements, it was only a matter of time before their morale crumbled. That would be the end of their army. Everything was within his expectations, and Yang Chundong's originally nervous heart relaxed a lot. This could be seen from the fact that he had been coming out of the palace recently. Instead of staying in the palace, Yang Chundong had to walk around. He wanted to see the situation in Neon from his own perspective, especially the life of the people at the bottom. He wanted to know what they needed and what they hoped for. After understanding all this, he knew what to do to completely solve the problem here. Yang Chundong didn't know that everything he did was being watched by someone. It was the intelligence personnel left behind by the general's forces in Ping and Beijing. They received the latest order to keep a close eye on King Wunan of Damyang's every move. If this person stayed in the palace, they had to know the situation of the palace's defense and the time of the guard's shift change. From this point of view, in order to kill Yang Chundong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa must have been prepared to storm the palace. What the intelligence personnel left behind didn't expect was that the King Wunan of Damyang actually took the initiative to come out. Although there were many guards accompanying him, more than 200 each time, it was not as safe as staying in the palace. A few days later, Yamaguchi Fukada, the general's favorite, the captain of the samurai team, appeared. This also indicated that it was time to start the assassination plan against Yang Chundong. There were also 600 elite samurai with Yamaguchi Fukada. This was also thanks to Yang Chundong's policy towards the Japanese Empire. Since Ping and Beijing was occupied by him, except for the first half of the month when the city gate was closed and people were arrested and searched for, the rest of the time the city gate was open wide, as if it was welcoming guests from all over the world. There were even immigration counters on the streets of Ping and Beijing. The general idea was to give the people of the Japanese Empire who wanted to be safe and live an ordinary life a way out. After all, the Japanese Empire was in internal strife, and the people who suffered the most would always be the people. Unlike those ambitious warlords, many people were still willing to live on the land in front of them. Once the immigration counters were opened, a large number of people signed up every day. Many of them had heard the news and came from nearby cities, or even farther places. The 600 elite samurai were mixed in with these people. They were dressed like ordinary people and sneaked into Ping and Beijing. It was so easy to enter Ping and Beijing, which made Yamaguchi Fukada more confident about the completion of this mission. He had brought 600 elite samurai, which was almost all of his strength. It was not impossible for him to storm the palace if he was prepared, not to mention assassinating Yang Chundong outside the palace. He was full of confidence. Fukada Tani, who was originally attacking Ping and Beijing, had taken the Maori regularization's ass. Yang Chendong seemed to have completely forgotten about the so-called safety. Every day after breakfast, he would start to visit the streets. These days, he even directly left Kyoto and began to wander in the nearby mountains and forests. He gave people the feeling that he was on a scenic tour, but he did not bring Princess Junko with him, which inevitably made people suspicious. Some intelligence personnel of the Japanese Empire thought that King Wunan of Daimyong was waiting for something, and that he should have known that someone was going to assassinate him. Regarding this, Yamaguchi Fukada naturally had a face full of disbelief. The assassination of Yang Chendong was extremely secret. Even the 600 samurai under his command only knew that they were going to carry out the mission, but they did not know the details of the mission. How could King Wunan of Daimyong know? It was clear that these people were scaring themselves and were scared by Yang Chendong. Yamaguchi Fukada had decided to act alone. With 600 samurai, even if they were prepared, what could they do? They could even kill him with a crowd of people. Speaking of which, Yang Chendong was not doing any seductive actions, nor was he setting up a trap for people to fall into. The reason why he had been wandering around the nearby mountains was because of the underground mines. The Japanese Empire was an island country. Due to the geological structure and volcanic rocks, there were very few mountains. However, in these mountains, there were relatively large reserves of coal, limestone, sulfur, copper, bismuth, and other minerals. The main reason why he appeared near Ping and Beijing was not because of these, but because he knew that there was a silver mountain nearby. This was also the main reason why the Japanese Empire was able to develop in the later period. He came to find the exact location of this place. Speaking of which, he still had to thank Yang Chendong for his previous life. When he was carrying out a mission here under the name of Yang Dong, he happened to hear from a local old man that there used to be a silver mountain here hundreds of years ago. The silver content was very high and very pure. That was God's longing for the people of the Japanese Empire. In fact, he was a little curious, so he asked some people and confirmed the authenticity of this matter. Now that he had returned to hundreds of years ago and came to this place, how could he let go of the silver mountain? Yang Xie's development was too fast. His own ability to produce blood was not bad, but he still felt a little stretched. Although he found a few silver mountains on the island of the Great F country, it had greatly alleviated all kinds of economic pressure. But then again, who would complain about having too much money? These days, Yang Chendong suddenly thought of this matter. Every day, he wandered around the nearby mountains to determine which mountain was his target. After a few days of hard work, he finally determined that his final target was the 3 mountains in front of him. Later, as long as he sent people to dig and develop, there would be a surprise waiting for him. After many days of hard work, there was finally a good result. Yang Chendong could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then, from a distance behind him, there were sounds of fighting and yelling. Then, Beta Persei talked to a Long Wei who ran from afar for a while, then returned to Yang Chendong's side and said, "Young master, someone wanted to assassinate you, but was discovered by Long Wei outside and suppressed with the 95 style. Want to kill me?" Yang Chendong was stunned when he heard this, then he smiled. He now appeared as an invader. Although it was for the sake of the 8th Madam Princess Junko, it also broke the original balance here. It was normal for someone to want to kill him. Since they could force Long Wei to use the 95 style, needless to say, the other party's background was not small. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. Yang Chendong asked again, "Do you know who came?" Chapter 11:14. I'll send someone to check it out. Beta Persei turned around and left. After a while, he took the 2 Long Wei soldiers and ran towards the direction where the gunshots came from. In that direction, Yamaguchi Fukada was smashing the ground with his fist. Some stones were smashed to pieces under the huge force, but he didn't seem to feel it at all. Samurai are different from ninjas. They can use the things around them, plus their own flexibility and speed, etc., to hide their body and achieve the effect of approaching the target at the closest distance. This way, they are better at assassination. In contrast, samurai's combat power is more powerful, but they are only strong in normal combat power. Every time they want to get close to the target, they have to make some big noise. Just like now, as soon as they made their decision, they were spotted by the dragon guards who were in charge of the outer perimeter security. After a failed warning, the dragon guards immediately opened fire. The dozens of warriors who were charging at the front were shot dead on the ground amidst the battle cries. The distance was at least 300 meters. The death of the samurai frightened Yamaguchi Fukada. He was forced to let the other samurai lie on the ground and try not to expose his body as much as possible. But at the same time, he was furious. This kind of opponent that he couldn't reach at all made him feel powerless. Under such a feeling, how could he be in a good mood? Captain, let's retreat. The guns in their hands are too powerful, and they can fire continuously. If we rush up, we will only die. A samurai captain, who was also Yamaguchi Fukada's trusted aide, crawled to his side and said, "Should we retreat?" Yamaguchi Fukada was unwilling. This time, their appearance was so sudden, but they couldn't get close to the target. They didn't even see young Qindong's true appearance. If they give up such an opportunity, it can be imagined that it will be even more difficult to assassinate him in the future. But if they don't retreat now, what's the difference between lying here and waiting for death? Once more time passed and more 5-star soldiers appeared. Wouldn't it be impossible for him to retreat even if he wanted to? For the sake of his subordinate's safety, Yamaguchi Fukada finally made the decision to retreat and look for an opportunity. At this moment, he realized that the 5-star army had started to retreat. What's going on? Yamaguchi Fukada was puzzled at first, but then he thought of something and laughed. I know, it must be because the other party's guns are out of gunpowder, or they are running out of gunpowder. Otherwise, why would they retreat when they have the upper hand? Yamaguchi Fukada, who felt that he knew the truth, was filled with energy again. After a loud shout, he ordered his warriors to get up and charge forward. However, for the sake of safety, only a few dozen warriors stood up this time. They were also guarding against the enemy's muskets and didn't want to suffer too many losses. The few dozen warriors stood up and waved their katanas as they charged forward. The 5-star army on the other side was indeed only retreating. They only occasionally fired a shot or two, but they were far less concentrated and confident than before. Yamaguchi Fukada saw all of this and was very excited. With loud shouts, the warriors under his command all stood up and charged forward in a frenzy. Yang Qindong was standing in an open space at the foot of the mountain. On his left and right were 100 Longwei soldiers. At this moment, they were all holding the 95 style in their hands and stood proudly. In front of them, the 50 Longwei soldiers who were in charge of the periphery were quickly retreating. When they retreated to Yang Qindong's side, the person in charge, Peng Yu, laughed and took the initiative to say, "Sixth young master, the mission to lure the enemy has been successfully completed." Very good. Yang Qindong nodded with a smirk on his face. Of course, the retreat this time was not caused by a lack of bullets. After the assassination in Baiming's Kyoto Yongding Gate, the Longwei soldiers were fully equipped with bullets when they went out with Yang Qindong. 200 people could easily deal with an enemy 10 times their number, not to mention that this time they were facing an enemy 3 times their number. How could they not have enough bullets? However, he still made a move to retreat in order to eliminate all of them. Once they escaped and returned to Ping and City, they would be the biggest threat to his safety. Yamaguchi Fukada didn't know that when he saw that the enemy only had a few hundred people, which was a quarter of his forces, he couldn't help but want to look up to the sky and sigh. This was an opportunity given to them by the heavens. When the distance between the two sides was only 200 meters, Yamaguchi Fukada led the samurais closer step by step with a determined look on his face. Their speed was very fast. 180 meters, 150 meters. Soon, it was 120 meters. At this distance, those who had some strength could shoot with a strong bow. Finally, the Longwei soldiers raised their lowered muzzles one by one. With Beta Persei's order, bursts of fire spewed out from the muzzles and fell on the samurais opposite them one by one, forming little blood flowers. These were blood flowers, not snowflakes. With the appearance and production of these blood flowers, the samurais fell one after another in the process of charging. After several waves of attack, there were less than 200 people left in the team of nearly 600 people. Such a fast death rate made Yamaguchi Fukada's heart bleed after seeing it. This was the result of many years of hard work to train these 600 elites, but now, they died one by one without even touching the opponent's clothes or seeing the opponent's appearance clearly. This result was unacceptable. You guys retreat. The rest of you, charge with me. In order to leave a seed of hope for the samurais, Yamaguchi Fukada gritted his teeth and issued an order, forcing a team of 50 people to retreat, while he himself still resolutely rushed forward. Even if he was going to die, he wanted to die while charging forward. This was the only way to not disgrace the spirit of the samurai. But what happened next made Yamaguchi Fukada have the urge to vomit blood again. Just behind them, when the 50 samurais that he regarded as seeds turned around, 50 Longway members suddenly appeared behind them. These 50 people came in a roundabout way after the battle started, with the idea of completely wiping out the enemy. Under the leadership of Yamaguchi Fukada, the 50 people fired their guns, as if they were practicing shooting. The difference was that they were shooting at targets during training, but now they were shooting at real enemies. 50 against 50, the battle ended very quickly. After hearing the gunshots and turning his head, Yamaguchi Fukada saw the scene of all the retreating members dying. At this time, there were less than 10 samurais standing beside him, and this was because the Longway members showed mercy and did not continue to use them as targets. Otherwise, none of them would have survived. At this moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 80 meters. At a distance of 80 meters, the 95 style still had the advantage and completely controlled the situation. Beta Persei finally said, "You guys, surrender." Beta Persei shouted this sentence in Japanese. Although it was a little awkward, it was enough for the other party to understand what he said. Surrender? Yamaguchi Fukada's crazy face was constantly twisted. There was nothing more humiliating than surrendering to a samurai. Ninjas could surrender, but samurais could not. This had a lot to do with the requirements of their daily training and education. At this moment, Yamaguchi Fukada first shook his head, then shouted with all his strength, "I've heard that the 5-star Army's warriors are all good at fighting, but I don't know if you dare to fight with us in close combat and let us see your methods and abilities." This kind of scene often happened in later generations of TV dramas. Often, when the villain said this sentence, the omnipotent main character would appear. He would either hold a large sword or a red spear and go into battle alone. With just a few answers, he would be able to kill several Woka pirates. It was a very satisfying scene, but that was just a TV effect. In reality, no one would do that. Was it fun to take the risk? Moreover, when the pirates were surrounded by Han people, how many of them would choose to fight you one-on-one? Wouldn't they swarm you or shoot you to end your opponent's life? Idiot. Listening to Yamaguchi Fukada's challenge, Yang Chendong slightly opened his mouth and spat out these two words. Beta Persei, who had been by his side for a long time, already knew what kind of personality the young master had. He also smiled. This idiot in his ears was like an order to open fire. He first raised his right arm high, then quickly lowered it, bringing with it a burst of gunfire. Poor Yamaguchi Fukada, in the end, didn't even touch the corner of a Longway's clothes. He was shot several times and died. Even when he died, his eyes were still wide open, as if he died with a grievance. After the investigation, a total of 603 corpses were found, including 2 intelligence personnel from the Japanese Empire. Yang Chendong casually ordered people to dig a big hole and bury them. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a very sharp knife in his eyes. In the eyes of many people in the Japanese Empire, they represented a very powerful existence. They were not in Yang Chendong's eyes at all. They were just countless assassins who wanted to kill him, but in the end, they were killed instead. Yang Chendong really didn't have the slightest interest in them. Because this incident happened outside the city, it didn't attract any attention. Only some high-level members of the 5-star army knew about it. Matsumoto Kazuma, who had just returned from the Shanin Road, was fortunate enough to know about this news. His face was full of shock and stupefaction. For a long time, ninjas and samurai were like 2 life and death enemies. They became the 2 sharp swords in the hands of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. No one could stop them as long as they pointed at them. Chapter 11:15. But now, the ninjas surrendered to the 5-star army, and all the samurai were killed. This result shocked Matsumoto Kazuma, but it also strengthened his determination to be loyal to Yang Chendong. This master was too powerful, so powerful that even a little bit of resistance was a sin. In the face of such a person, it was best to be obedient. Perhaps the ninjas could be carried forward under his leadership. As for his old enemy, Yamaguchi Fukada, he died without a trace. He couldn't say whether he was happy or disappointed, because anyone who became an enemy of Yang Chendong would end up like this. The only difference was that it was sooner or later. Matsumoto Kazuma didn't feel anything. Yang Chendong wasn't a person who didn't fight back. Although Yamaguchi Fukada's appearance didn't threaten his safety, it didn't even have the qualifications to be scared. But this person was sent by Ashikaga Yoshimasa to assassinate him. Just based on this, he must return the favor. Matsumoto Kazuma was once again ordered to come to the Imperial Palace and received a mission here to assassinate Ashikaga Yoshimasa. According to Yang Chendong, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was the most powerful general in the Japanese Empire. He had once forced the emperor to a dead end. He must be heavily guarded, and it wouldn't be easy to kill him. But it didn't matter. Even if he couldn't kill him, he still needed to scare him. If he couldn't kill him, then he would kill some people who were close to him. As for who these people were, presumably Matsumoto Kazuma, who had been important by his side, would be very clear. 20 heads. If we can't kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa, then we'll take the heads of 20 of his trusted subordinates. I want to let people know that if they want to kill me, they will have to pay a heavy price. 110 is not enough. 120 is barely enough. This was Yang Chendong's original words to Matsumoto Kazuma. Matsumoto Kazuma, who had completely surrendered, not only didn't have the slightest difficulty, but also used this mission as an opportunity to show off his achievements and prove his strength. He personally led Suzuki, 10 Jonin and 30 Chunin to send out the mission, proving their determination to complete this mission. Yang Chendong, who sent out this mission, turned his head as if nothing had happened. He sent a report to Yu Qian, asking him to arrange mining personnel to come to the Japanese Empire. Then he focused his attention on the campaign to conquer Nankado. The war in the Jiu-E prefecture was as difficult as he expected. The soldiers and civilians of the Japanese Empire on the island resisted with all their strength. As an important stronghold of the Japanese Naval Division, the people here lived a good life. They were rarely affected by the war. After encountering the invasion of the Five-Star Army, in order to protect their power, they naturally resisted with all their strength. And because of the participation of the people, the enemy was developing more and more. Fortunately, the commander of the new army, Su He, took these factors into consideration before leaving, and barely managed to maintain the situation. When the reinforcements appear, it's time to counterattack with all their strength. Compared to the stalemate in the Jiu-E prefecture, the attack in the Iwaju Island became smoother and smoother. Although the initial resistance was fierce, as the 1st Reserve Division got used to the battlefield environment and exerted all their strength, the Japanese army in the Iwaju Island, without any outside help, finally showed signs of defeat and continued to expand. Finally, after 12 days of resistance, the main force was destroyed, and the rest were captured. The flag of the Five-Star Army was planted in the Iwaju Island, which meant that the South Island had completely become an isolated city without any support. If they want to escape, they have to go through the artillery fire of the C4 Division and the C5 Division patrolling the surrounding waters. After suffering heavy losses in several consecutive attacks, they finally became well-behaved. After successfully capturing the Iwaju Island, according to the previous plan, the defense of the island was handed over to the E-1st Division. He himself took the 1st Reserve Division and a division of cavalry back to the Jiu-E prefecture by transport ship and dealt with the remaining Japanese army together with Commander Su He. Compared to the Five-Star Army, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's situation became more and more difficult. Although the opposing forces in the flat well field had gradually lost their survival space under his suppression, the sudden appearance of ninja killers still gave the Supreme General a great headache. Fortunately, with the protection of the Divine Archery Battalion, plus the protection of the always cautious guards, he didn't get killed by the ninjas, but following that, his trusted subordinates were constantly killed. In just a few days, more than a dozen of his trusted subordinates had died, and it seemed that the ninjas didn't have any intention of stopping. Yamaguchi Fukada's samurai brigade had been missing for a long time, and Ashikaga Yoshimasa had reason to suspect that they had been completely wiped out. The appearance of these ninja killers also proved his guess. This was simply a revenge and targeting method implemented by the King Wunan of Daimyong. Originally, it was him who made the first move. Was there anything wrong with the other party giving him a taste of his own medicine? He just hoped that these ninjas would leave quickly, so that he could restore the stability under his rule. Finally, the 20 heads of the ministers were gathered together, and the ninjas suddenly disappeared without a trace as if they had come. Ashikaga Yoshimasa felt that the wind had passed, and at the same time, he ordered the army to go down north and launch the final attack on the Flatwell Field that had less than 10,000 soldiers. The Flatwell Field was the minister that the emperor relied on, and he rose up after Princess Junko announced to the world that Ashikaga Yoshimasa had committed a crime. Logically speaking, even if he wasn't Yang Qindong's ally, he wouldn't be his enemy. But Yang Qindong didn't have a good impression of this person. Since you have so much power, why didn't you stand in front of the emperor earlier? If you did that, how could Ashikaga Yoshimasa be the dominant force? You didn't do that, but stood out after the death of the emperor and claimed to be righteous. This kind of person was clearly trying to take advantage of the situation. Yang Qindong didn't have the heart to pay attention to such a person and allowed him to slowly weaken under the powerful attacks of the Grand General until he disappeared. Yang Qindong had never been interested in the internal strife of the Japanese Empire. He was constantly accumulating his strength, waiting for the grand battle with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. At that time, the entire Japanese Empire would be decided. For the sake of this day, the foreign divisions formed by the various provinces were sent to a nation by the Navy's transport ships. The appearance of the foreign 4th Division, the foreign 5th Division, and the foreign 6th Division made the chips in Yang Qindong's hands even heavier. In the 8th month of 1458 AD, 8 months after Yang Qindong arrived in the Japanese Empire, Ashikaga Yoshimasa finally dealt with the biggest opposition to him, the Flatwell Field, and killed him in the midst of the chaos. Then, he began to mobilize his troops, looking as if he was going to head straight for Ping and Beijing. A great battle to determine the ultimate leadership of the Japanese Empire was about to begin. After Flatwell Field was killed, the Grand General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had successfully taken over the Hokuriku province, quickly received a letter of surrender from the ruler of the northernmost Hokuriku province. At this point, he became the new king of the Japanese Empire. If it wasn't for the sudden intervention of the 5-star army, his power would have far surpassed that of the deceased emperor. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who had reorganized the army left behind by Hareda's death, and recruited a lot of new troops from the local area. His army had reached a total of 500,000 men, and he led his army down south, heading straight for Heian City. From his point of view, it was time to settle the grudge between him and Yang Qindong. The Awaji Island and Ji Prefecture had already been taken by Yang Qindong, and only Nankado was not in his hands. However, that didn't matter anymore. With the C4th Division and C5th Division keeping an eye on that place, and with the absolute advantage of the high-tech artillery, the other side had no chance of escaping. Without any support, and even with the supply of food and water completely cut off, how long could the 300,000 Japanese army in Nankado last? Yang Qindong was also curious. Of course, now was not the time to think about these things. The Grand General had already led the main forces to head down. How to stop the enemy's attack was the problem that needed to be considered now. There was also news from the mountain shade. The local force Sensei Naganabu that he supported had finally lost to the 100,000 elite troops of the Maori regularization. Originally, Shun Tianya's sudden attack, after snatching the rations of Maori Zhengz's 100,000-strong army, had indeed foiled the enemy's original plan, forcing them to turn back. However, elites were elites. When the Maori regularization, with the support of the Grand General, regained the provisions, the two sides fought a bloody battle. It could not even be called a bloody battle. After a slight resistance, Fukada Tani's troops were defeated. If not for Sensei Naganabu's timely arrival, he would have died. The Maori regularization was worthy of being the Grand General's #1 fierce general. Even in the face of the joint forces of Sensei Naganabu and Fukada Tani, he did not have the slightest fear. Instead, he ordered a fierce attack. In the end, After a standoff of 12 hours, Sensei Naganabu, who had allied with the Maori regularization, was disappointed to find that some of his allies had left him. The actions of his allies caused Sensei Naganabu to lose their support. In the end, they had no choice but to retreat regretfully. Because of this, the Maori regularization had taken over half of the mountain shade. They had seized countless provisions and people, greatly increasing their own strength. At the same time, it had also increased the difficulty of Yang Qindong's conquest of the Japanese Empire. Outside Ping and Beijing, the mountain shades Dambo Prefecture, the Dongshan Prefecture's Jinjiang Prefecture, and the Donghai Prefecture's Iga region were all filled with flags and military tents. From a distance, it looked like there was no end to it. It looked like they were going to rush up and tear apart Ping and Beijing. In the palace of Ping and Beijing, Yang Qindong was not aware that he was surrounded. On the contrary, he had a relaxed expression on his face. At this moment, he was looking at the subordinates who had followed him. The 1st Cavalry Division's commander Tian Hu, the 4th Army Division's commander Ling Daqiang, the 7th Army's commander Tian Su, the New Army's commander Su He, the 1st Reserve Division's commander Su Da, as well as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Division's commanders were all present. Behind them were the 5-star Army's 220,000 soldiers. Compared to Ashikaga Yoshimasa's 600,000 soldiers, this was a small number. However, compared to the 5-star Army, this was already a considerable force. Chapter 11:16. Apart from a few foreign tribes, the rest were all elite soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles. Among them were the Longfeng Division, the Lu 4th Division, and the Lu 7th Division, who were all armed with firearms. And all these people were gathered together just to defend the peace capital. So Yang Qindong really didn't feel any pressure. Of course, if it was just to defend the city, these troops were naturally enough. But Yang Qindong didn't just want that. He wanted to conquer the entire Japanese Empire, especially when Ming boasted of its wings and gradually began to show its fangs. The pressure on the new 1st Army and the new 2nd Army on the grassland was increasing day by day. If the problem couldn't be solved, unpredictable things would happen at any time. Ming's development over the years, especially since the mobilization of the entire army, had risen to 4 million troops. Just this huge number alone was enough to have a deterrent effect. Against them, even Yang Qindong didn't have the confidence to win. Ants could bite an elephant to death. It wasn't just a saying. Therefore, in the eyes of others, Yang Qindong, who should be defending Ping and Beijing, had decided to launch a counterattack. He wanted to eliminate the main force of Ashikaga Yoshimasa, so as to quickly get out of the quagmire of war in the Japanese Empire. The war in the Japanese Empire had been going on for 8 months. Compared to taking down the Golden Border Dynasty in 30 days and taking down the other Southeast Asian countries in 2 or 3 months, the delay here was really too long. The longer the war dragged on, the greater the investment and the greater the pressure on money and food. This was naturally not a good thing for Yang Xie, who was still in the development period. Even if it was to solve the pressure in other aspects, the war here should be over. The people present at the meeting were all the troops Yang Qindong had to attack the Japanese Empire. Yes, at this moment, he couldn't find any more reinforcements. Although the 5-star army was strong and had developed over the years, their military strength wasn't too little. However, they had occupied too much territory and there were too many places that needed to be guarded. These 200,000-plus soldiers were already the majority of Yang Qindong's mobile forces. When Yang Qindong's gaze landed on the generals, everyone's gaze also converged on him. Upon closer inspection, one could see that their breathing was slightly rapid. Clearly, they had also guessed the theme of this meeting. They knew that the war was about to begin, and that the time to make a great contribution had come. Compared to the nervousness in the hearts of the generals, Yang Qindong was extremely relaxed. The reason why he made this decision was because of Dezong. Yang Xie's growth today was all thanks to Okura. From small daily necessities to big guns and cannons, Yang Xie earned a lot of money and expanded his power. Advanced technology and weapons that were hundreds of years old were the key for Yang Qindong to become stronger and achieve his great goals. This time, with 200,000-plus soldiers against 600,000, Yang Qindong also had to rely on Okura's strength. A completely feasible plan was already in his mind. Now, all he had to do was to realize it and set the foundation for conquering the entire Japanese empire. Are you all very excited? After a moment of silence, Yang Qindong's voice finally rang out. When it reached the ears of the generals, they couldn't help but laugh. Yes, this is indeed a good time for you to make a contribution. This battle will also be our victory, a moment that will forever be remembered in history. Is everyone ready? When Yang Qindong's voice resounded through the entire imperial palace, all the generals replied in unison, "Be ready at all times." Very good. Satisfied with everyone's answer, Yang Qindong once again said in a clear voice, "Generals, listen up." At the same time, in the Japanese army's camp, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was also holding a military meeting. Many of his subordinates stood on both sides, waiting for the general to make a strategic decision. Their military strength was almost 3 times that of the 5-star armies. They were also very familiar with the terrain and had the support of millions of Japanese Empire citizens. Ashikaga Yoshimasa couldn't see any possibility of failure. At one point, he even thought that the 5-star army was able to conquer Ping and Beijing because they took advantage of a loophole. If it wasn't for the internal strife that was too serious, how could the 5-star army achieve such results? Yes, the 5-star army had powerful firearms, and their power was very great. However, when facing the charge of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, firearms could only play a supporting role. In the end, it still depended on the strength of the soldiers. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a history of small guns and rifles defeating cannons and machine guns. Besides, the Japanese Empire didn't have any firearms at all. They also had some ordinary red coat cannons, about 100 of them. These were the ones that Ashikaga Yoshimasa took the initiative to submit to Beiming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, and were transported by sea. As for ordinary firearms, they also had about 5,000 of them. Although they were far inferior to Longfeng's Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, they could still fire up to a few hundred meters away, which could boost the morale of the soldiers. The most important thing was that they had enough military strength and the support of the citizens. This was also where the generals' confidence came from. Other than the Northern Land Road, which was affected by the war, the grain fields of Donghai Road, especially the Dongshan Road, which was the largest area, were almost unaffected. With enough food, even if they faced the 5-star army for a few years, they could still hold on. Compared to the 5-star army, who had to rely on sea transportation for all their food and drink, they already had a natural advantage. With such confidence, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was sitting at the head of the table, had a smile on his face throughout the meeting. In the end, after everyone's discussion, they came up with a final battle plan, which was to use a protracted war, using attrition as the main strategy. In the end, they would force the 5-star army to retreat from the Japanese Empire and achieve their goal of independence. Doesn't the 5-star army have cannons? Moreover, they can fire up to a distance of 13 miles. Good, then our general's tent will be 13 miles away, maintaining a safe distance from you. As long as the general is fine, the front line won't collapse. They wanted to see how many cannons the 5-star army had, how many cannons they had, how many cannons they had, and how many cannons they had. Just from this point alone, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's mind was still very clear. At least, he didn't choose to attack Ping and Beijing. Otherwise, with a strong city and powerful cannons, he would be the one at a disadvantage. However, if it was a confrontation, then it would be completely different. Especially since Beiming had sent news that they were about to encircle and annihilate the 5-star army on the grasslands. As long as they could hold the 5-star army's main force here, once the grasslands fell, their minds would be in chaos. At that time, it would be time for them to retreat without fighting. With the help of their allies, they only needed to continue the confrontation. Holding the 5-star army's main force would be a great achievement. What was there to be afraid of? After the meeting, the generals returned to their respective camps. A large net was spread out, and it was as if they were in a confrontation. At the same time, all the generals' tents were moved to a place 15 miles away from Ping and Beijing to ensure that nothing would go wrong. The movements of the Japanese army were collected by the intelligence department and sent to Yang Qindong. Looking at the result that was as he expected, Yang Qindong only sneered. In his heart, he thought, Who told you that the five-star army's cannons can only fire up to a range of 13 miles? The so-called 100mm mortar was only used by the Cold Vanguard Army because it was convenient to carry around. In the warehouse, who knew how many powerful cannons were not taken out? For example, the Type 86 122mm howitzer. The Type 86 122mm howitzer was based on the Soviet Union's D-30 122mm howitzer. According to the needs of modern warfare, the Type 86 122mm howitzer was developed in 1985 to replace the old Type 54 and 54-1 or 122mm howitzer. The Type 86 122mm howitzer's barrel was longer, and it was 30 times the caliber. It weighed 3.2 tons and had a firing rate of 6 to 8 rounds per minute. It had a 360 degrees firing range. It could use anti-personnel grenades, armor-piercing bullets, extended-range bullets, smoke bombs, flares, anti-armor shrapnel, and many other types of ammunition. The range of normal shells was 18 kilometers, and the range of concave extended-range bullets was 21 kilometers. The Type 86 used anti-armor shrapnel that contained 30 bullets. It had an armor-piercing thickness of 500 millimeters and a maximum range of 15 kilometers. Compared to other types of howitzers, the Type W86 structure was compact, easy to operate, long-range, high accuracy, simple manufacturing, and low cost. It could be said that it caught up with the world's advanced standards, especially the Type 80 SIXS 360 degrees firing range and long range. It was second to none in the world. The range of the Type W86 was 15 kilometers, which was twice the range of the 100mm howitzer. It could definitely catch the enemy off guard. In Ping and Beijing's national treasury, there was a 122mm howitzer. As to when it appeared and why it appeared, no one knew. However, they knew that it was very powerful. At this point, it had to be said that Yang Qindong had set up a persona for himself. He rarely explained anything that was taken out of the warehouse. At first, some people were curious about where the things came from. Beta Persei had also made mistakes in this regard. He even chased after Yang Qindong for an answer. The answer was that he did not get any answer and was even arranged to train in the army. This scared Beta Persei. He was not afraid of hardships as a soldier, but he was afraid that he would lose his identity as a young family servant. After training for a while, he returned to Yang Qindong's side and kept his mouth shut. He knew what to ask and what not to ask. Even Beta Persei was like this. It could be imagined that other people would not dare to ask so many questions. Because of this, Yang Qindong became even more mysterious. When the 122mm howitzer appeared in front of several generals, they were inevitably shocked. Some of them had heard some news that there were some powerful cannons being developed in the arsenal of Qiqian City, but no one had seen what it looked like. Now that they finally had the opportunity to feast their eyes, they were naturally surprised and excited. Chapter 11-17. Sixth Young Master, Can we touch it? Commander Long Si, Ling Dechong, asked excitedly and nervously. As the commander in charge of the firearms division, he had a natural affinity for firearms. When he saw the powerful cannon, he was as excited as a cavalry seeing a good horse. Commander Long Chi's face was also filled with excitement, but at the same time, he was also very nervous, afraid that Yang Qindong would reject him. Fortunately, Yang Qindong nodded with a smile. Of course, this thing isn't made of paper. It won't break. This sentence also caused the crowd to burst into laughter. Then, everyone walked up and touched the metal thing that was rumored to be powerful. Even the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Tian Hu, looked at it curiously. In the era of cold weapons, cavalry was already a very powerful existence. The Mongol Empire was the one who used them to the extreme, and they had once conquered a huge piece of land. It wasn't until firearms appeared that cavalry went from glory to decline. Based on this, Tian Hu shouldn't like firearms. Just like the commander of the new army, Su He, who led a cavalry division, he obviously didn't like firearms. He thought that the appearance of firearms suppressed the development of cavalry. As a student of the Yang Family Academy, Tian Hu didn't think this way. Or rather, he didn't like it. But his rationality told him that the situation was irreversible. Since that was the case, it was better to learn more and accept new things and new technology so that they wouldn't be eliminated by society. After a quarter of an hour, the entire body of the 122mm howitzer had been touched by everyone. Yang Chendong said, "You've seen the cannon. Next, it's up to you guys to see how you perform. In short, you must find Ashikaga Yoshimasa's main tent. Only then can the power of the cannon be maximized, and it's time for us to counterattack." Understood. When it came to serious matters, all the generals became serious and replied in unison. Yes, Yang Chendong's plan was to capture the ringleader first. As long as they could bombard Ashikaga Yoshimasa without a leader, the next battle would be easy. Speaking of which, this wasn't the first time Ashikaga Yoshimasa was threatened by cannons. When the emperor was still alive, he had bought the Type 59-130mm cannon from the 5-star army through his daughter, Princess Junko. This cannon had a longer range than the Type 122mm howitzer, and he had spent a total of 10,000 to 20,000 taels of silver to buy it. It could be said that the emperor had used up all his money. The 122mm howitzer was only halfway to its target. This time, if it wanted to show off its power, it had to find Ashikaga Yoshimasa's specific location first. This matter could only be entrusted to the various generals, and the generals who already knew everything were all thinking about how to complete this mission and earn some merit. Outside Ping and Beijing, the 500,000-strong Japanese Empire's army stood in a continuous line. They maintained a distance of more than 10 li between the two sides, indicating that they were cautious and prepared. All the generals' tents had to be pushed back by 5 li to make it safer. However, as the great general, the commander-in-chief of the three armies, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's tent had to be pushed back by 5 li to make it safer. The distance of 25 li from the city gate made Ashikaga Yoshimasa's entire body feel safe, especially when there were several fake main tents in the surroundings. Unless the high-ranking generals knew the inside story, it would be difficult to tell which one was the real main tent and which one was his shelter. Some people didn't think much of Ashikaga Yoshimasa's cautiousness and thought that it was a sign that he was afraid of the 5-star army. However, for the great general who had almost lost his life to the cannons, he believed that facing the 5-star army with their advanced cannons, no matter what he did, it wouldn't be too much. This was because he had personally witnessed the scene of the great general's mansion being razed to the ground. It could be said that he would never forget it. After suffering a loss, he had to remember it. This time, Ashikaga Yoshimasa had set up his main tent in front of the rear army. After the middle army, it was 25 li away from Ping and Beijing. Not only that, but he had also created several fake main tents to cover himself. He didn't believe that the 5-star army could do anything to him this time. In modern warfare, military headquarters were built very hidden. Even radar couldn't detect it. This was because they were worried that the enemy would directly lock onto them and kill them. Speaking of which, this was called being cautious. In comparison, although Ashikaga Yoshimasa had also made some preparations, his level was too low. As the director of the Japanese Empire's Intelligence Bureau, Guanxing had already made arrangements. He was just waiting for Ashikaga Yoshimasa to reveal his approximate location and report it through the radio. What the 5-star army needed to do was to force out Ashikaga Yoshimasa's exact location. As for how to do this, it wasn't difficult. They only needed to launch a large-scale attack. Once the enemy's formation was in chaos, the main tent with the most people would naturally be the target of their attack. It's up to you. On top of the North City Tower in Ping and Beijing, Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden armor, looked at the generals below with bright eyes and spoke with confidence. "Please rest assured, 6th young master." All the generals who led the troops were also very excited and replied with a firm expression. This time, only one regiment of the new army was left behind to take care of the daily security of Ping and Beijing, including the 5 foreign divisions. This showed Yang Chendong's great determination to destroy the Japanese Empire in one battle. No one would have thought that Yang Chendong would actually adopt a posture of attacking with all his troops when he was outnumbered. And it was precisely because of this that they were able to catch the enemy off guard and gather the enemy in one battle. "Open the city gates," Yang Chendong ordered in a firm tone. Open the city gates. Beta Persei on the side shouted with his loud voice. Then, the thick and heavy city gates of Ping and Beijing were pushed open from the inside. The second division, who had been waiting here, was the first to rush out. The order in which they exited the city was based on the order of strength. First was the 5 foreign divisions, followed by the 1st Reserve Division, then the 4th Division and the 7th Army. Finally, the New Army and the 1st Cavalry Division were the last to exit the city gates. The purpose of this was to ensure that when they launched an attack, their steps would be orderly. Otherwise, the cavalry would have already rushed out far away before the infantry behind them could catch up. This way, it wouldn't have the effect of shocking the enemy, nor would it create a powerful momentum. One by one, the 5-star army walked out of the city gates and approached the Japanese army on the battlefield. When this scene was seen by the scouts, they immediately reported it to the generals of the front army. After that, the news continued to be reported to the main tent at the rear. At the beginning of the first day, the Japanese army wasn't surprised to see the 5-star army send out troops. In their view, it was clear that the enemy couldn't hold back and wanted to send out troops to test them. They only needed to wait in place and wait for the enemy to be exhausted. If the other party was just testing them, they shouldn't launch any attacks. But if they launched an attack, they only needed to fight back. In the end, the initiative had always been in their hands. And as the 5-star army rushed out one after another, the number of people increased more and more. First, it was 20,000, 60,000, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 people. It was already far beyond their expectations. At this moment, some people finally couldn't hold back anymore. All kinds of reports and messengers quickly rushed back. No matter what kind of disguise they used before, when those messengers appeared one by one and gathered in the main tent, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's real location was completely exposed. There were 4 things that Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't expect. First, he didn't expect that after putting so much effort into disguising himself, it would be exposed so quickly. Second, he didn't expect that there were already some Japanese army soldiers around his main tent who had been bribed by the management. So when his position in the main tent was exposed, the news had already spread quickly. Third, he didn't expect that the 5-star army had already prepared a lethal weapon with an attack range of up to 30 miles. Fourth, he didn't expect that there would be something like a telegram, which could actually send a message thousands of miles away in an instant. All kinds of unexpected things made Ashikaga Yoshimasa meet the messengers one after another. Before he was ready to move his camp, a heavy whistling sound resounded in front of him. Then the first artillery shell fell from the sky and landed on the ground more than 10 meters away from his main tent. The destructive power of the 122 mm howitzer is far from what the 100 mm mortar can compare to. With just one shot, a huge pit of 3 meters deep was blown out. At the same time, the surrounding 20 to 30 meters were all affected by the aftermath. Among them was Ashikaga Yoshimasa. At the moment when the main tent was blown away, he was also injured by the aftermath of the artillery shell and fainted immediately. This was also because the guards around him were doing their duty. When the explosion happened, they instinctively protected him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been injured by the explosion. He might have been directly killed by the explosion. The war is about to begin, and as the commander-in-chief, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was actually injured by the explosion and fainted. It suddenly gave people a feeling that they were a group of dragons without a leader. The ones who suffered the most were the scouts sent by the various armies who were waiting for orders. Now that the commander-in-chief was unconscious, they didn't know what to do next. If they didn't have perfect cooperation and fought separately, wouldn't they be defeated one by one? Logically speaking, if the commander-in-chief wasn't here, the other vice-commander-in-chief could also stand up and take up the responsibility. It was Ashikaga Yoshimasa's fault for being used to holding power. He was afraid that others would covet his power. He did many things himself, so other than himself, most of the others were just decorations. They didn't have any authority. At this moment, it was impossible to pull out someone to take charge of the situation. Chapter 11:18. The other deputy commanders knew that it was useless to say anything now. They arranged for people to protect the unconscious Ashikaga Yoshimasa as they retreated. At the same time, they said to the scouts who had not been assigned to work, "Go back and tell your general to defend with all his might. Once the general's body gets better, he will immediately arrange for a counterattack." After they finished speaking, the people in the main tent began to quickly retreat. Needless to say, these people could already see that the situation was unfavorable. If they did not escape now, they would not have any chance to escape. The other scouts looked at each other, then helplessly shook their heads and left. The so-called words of the deputy commanders were not credible at all. What did they mean by defending with all their might? What should they do without a plan? Who would protect them from the flanks? Without a plan, wouldn't they fall into danger at any time? The scouts were very confused. The only thing they could do was to report back what they saw. As for what to do, it was up to their general to decide. A cannon from afar blew up the army camp, and the general was crippled before the battle began. The news of Ashikaga Yoshimasa being injured and unconscious quickly spread through the army camp. It also reached the ears of Guanxing. Another urgent telegram was sent to Yang Chendong. This made him, who had been bitterly waiting for news, unable to help but heavily slap the desk in front of him. He laughed heartily and said, "Good, the heavens are helping me. Pass down the order. The entire army will attack according to the plan. Take advantage of the enemy's weakness and take his life." Without a general, the enemy was like a person without a brain. Even if he had 4 limbs and was powerful, what was the use? He was just a human punching bag. On the main battlefield, Yang Chendong's order was quickly passed down to the various troops by the scouts. The 5-star army, who had been waiting for the final attack, became excited. Their battle cries were loud and could be heard clearly from more than 10 miles away. Then, the army attacked, heading straight for the enemy camp. Back to the Japanese army, the news of Ashikaga Yoshimasa being knocked unconscious had already spread. This made some of the generals have a bad feeling. On the battlefield of 500,000 soldiers, without a unified command, how chaotic would it be? If they couldn't cooperate with each other, how could they unleash their strength to the extreme? Since that was the case, should they choose to fight against the 5-star army's main force without any command? Or choose to retreat? Everyone had different ideas and thoughts. He kept making more and more choices between fighting and retreating. As a result, there were people retreating and people fighting. Not to mention the retreating army. After they left the battlefield, there were a lot of empty positions, which was the most fatal. As a result, some of the Japanese army suddenly realized that they had no allies left or right. What was originally a united front became a lone army. At this time, the 5-star army quickly filled in the gaps and occupied these unoccupied lands. Then, they attacked from the front, left, and right. The Japanese army that stayed behind to defend became targets. When faced with attacks from 3 sides, their defensive line quickly collapsed, and then they were defeated. The good situation was ruined in an instant, especially the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army. Wherever they went, no one could stop them. Infantry was inherently weak against cavalry, and the morale of the army was shaken. The outcome seemed to have been decided long ago. This directly led to the encirclement of the Japanese Empire's lone army. They were heavily injured, and then they surrendered. When the 5 foreign divisions arrived at the front lines, they could only accept prisoners and various supplies. This made them somewhat unwilling, but there was no other way. In terms of speed and impact, they were far too inferior to cavalry. Only the 4th Army Division, the 7th Army, and elite infantry like the 1st Reserve Division could barely keep up with the cavalry and encircle or cripple the Japanese Empire. The development of the war went even more smoothly than planned. In just 3 days, they had defeated nearly 200,000 Japanese army and captured more than 180,000 of them. When the news reached the rear, Yang Chendong became very excited. He gave the order that the remaining soldiers should chase after the enemy and not follow the example of an overlord. The progress of the war was so smooth that it was impossible for the 5 foreign divisions to complete the task of cleaning up the battlefield and seizing supplies. Based on his past experience, Yang Chendong waved his hand and called for the other foreign and Han people who had already moved to Ping and Beijing to rush to the front lines and help the army clean up the battlefield. They would then distribute the spoils according to their work and reap the benefits. After coming to this world, Yang Chendong felt that some things had changed. For example, Using firearms to defeat cold weapons wasn't as exaggerated as it was described in history, where a few people could defeat thousands or even tens of thousands of people. Everything depended on the will to fight. If a few people with firearms were to face off against hundreds of Suicide Squad members, they wouldn't even dare to say that they could win, let alone thousands or tens of thousands of people. This was also the reason why he still couldn't achieve success even though he had a cold weapon army. Zhu Di, the founder of the Ming dynasty, had brought a firearms camp to conquer the grassland. But didn't he still win and lose against the grassland cavalry? It didn't mean that he had won a one-sided victory. Of course, some things didn't change, such as the power of the people. Everything had been proven when the dynasty of Phnom Penh was destroyed. The reason why a country was destroyed in 31 days was because of the help of the people. Now he wanted to copy the path of success and borrow the help of the foreign people in Ping and Beijing. Yang Qindong, who had always advocated for the unity of the army and the people, gave his orders. While it was hard to say whether the local aborigines would agree, but a portion of the Hans who had migrated from other races would respond enthusiastically. Some of them were even experienced enough to drive their own carriages out of the city in order to help the army transport more supplies. When tens of thousands of people entered the battlefield, and the number was still increasing, the pressure on the 5 foreign divisions was suddenly reduced. They could finally keep up with the pace of the other main forces. The follow-up forces followed. When Yang Qindong was about to take a breath, the Intelligence Bureau suddenly reported that a Japanese army of tens of thousands had appeared in the southwest of Ping and Beijing. They were marching rapidly towards Ping and Beijing. The leader was the first general under Ashikaga Yoshimasa, Maori regularization. It turned out that when the news of the Japanese army's defeat and the general's injury and coma reached the Shanin Road, Maori regularization felt that something was wrong. After thinking about it, he decided to take advantage of the fact that Ping and Beijing's military strength was empty to seize the place. In this way, it would be equivalent to cutting off the 5-star army's path of retreat. Perhaps it would be able to reverse the entire situation. With this idea in mind, Maori regularization left behind the main forces to continue crushing Sensei Naganabu, while he brought 20,000 soldiers and rushed towards Ping and Beijing. He wanted to take the Japanese Empire by surprise and reverse the situation. He wanted to be the hero of the Japanese Empire. 20,000? When he heard this result, Yang Qindong's eyes flashed with a trace of worry. At this time, the main forces of the 5-star army were constantly chasing after the Japanese Empire's army and inflicting heavy losses on them. If he wanted to call them back, it wouldn't be possible in a short period of time. On the contrary, it might cause an accident to the originally victorious situation. However, if he didn't call back the reinforcements, the current Ping and Beijing only had his 1,000 black cavalry and a regiment of new army cavalry. The total number of people was only 3,000. Considering that the security of the city couldn't be left unguarded, especially since most of the foreign races had already left the city and most of the Japanese Empire's natives were in the city, it was even more important to leave some defensive forces behind. Then let's fight. Yang Qindong quickly made a decision. He was determined to bring the 1,000 black cavalry and create another miracle. The black cavalry was Yang Qindong's ultimate bodyguard. Logically speaking, they should be the safest. However, on the battlefield, they had repeatedly become firefighters. Whenever there was danger, they would rush there. Who knew how many times they had played the role of a hero who won against a large number of enemies? This time, they had no choice but to go into battle and fight against a large number of enemies. He called the cavalry commander of the new army over and handed over the task of guarding Ping and Beijing. He told him that he must guard the city gate. If there was no other choice, he could close the gate and defend the city. Naturally, the commander was somewhat unwilling to do so. He even proposed that the 6th young master stay at home, and he would lead 2,000 cavalrymen into battle. Haha, you can't do it. This is not something that the black cavalry can accomplish. Yang Qindong smiled and rejected the other party's good intentions. This time, it wasn't that he looked down on his soldiers. It was the most correct choice from a practical point of view. After the decision was made, the 1,000 black cavalry were not afraid. On the contrary, they were all eager to fight. This could be seen from the fact that they began to wipe their sabers and constantly check their firearms and equipment. Fighting against 20,000 with 1,000 was an impossible task for any other army. Even the most elite 1st Cavalry Division might not be able to do it. However, when it came to the Black Cavalry, it was indeed a habit. They had impenetrable black armor, the most advanced firearms, the most tyrannical individual combat power, and the most powerful military leader in the world, Yang Chendong. When all these were gathered together, they were destined to create miracles and reach the peak of life. Among the 1,000 Black Cavalry, 200 of them were added later. Naturally, they were also the best in each army. They had all joined the 5-star army for more than 2 years and were completely politically qualified and loyal people. Not only that, many of these people were already officers before they joined the Black Cavalry. Some were platoon leaders, and some were even deputy company commanders. Some of them had great futures ahead of them, but the allure of joining the Black Knights and Dragon Guards was even greater. To be able to join this group was already the greatest achievement and glory of a lifetime. The Black Cavalry was the personal guard of the 6th Young Master. With this qualification, they would not show any fear even when facing some division commanders or even army commanders. Once they left a good impression in the eyes of the 6th Young Master, they could expect a great future. Chapter 11:19. Their luck was good. Not long after they joined the Black Cavalry, they encountered a bloody battle with 20,000 enemies. They couldn't help but feel excited. These Longway soldiers, who were originally grassroots officers, never knew what fear was. The morale of the soldiers was high. When they were gathered together, all the Black Cavalry soldiers had the will of the Grim Reaper in their eyes. Especially when Yang Chendong appeared in front of them on the back of the white dragon. Wearing a golden cloak, each and every one of them anxiously puffed out their chests, striving to show their best side. Very good. I've seen your high-spirited side. I also believe that it won't be long before some of you return to the army and take charge of it. I believe that at that time, everything you've experienced here will be unforgettable for the rest of your lives. Now, it's time for me to bring you guys to create a miracle. Are you guys confident? Yang Chendong said with satisfaction when he saw the fighting spirit of the warriors that was about to burst out of their bodies. Be ready at all times. Let's go. Yang Chendong took the lead, and the 4 of them walked straight to the north gate of Ping and Beijing. In the direction of Dambua County, a 20,000-man army was rushing towards Ping and Beijing. The leader was impressively Maori regularization, who was wearing a full suit of armor. At this time, his eyes were slightly anxious, and his eyes were a little bloodshot. This was the result of rushing through the night. Ever since he received the news that the Supreme General was seriously injured and in a coma, Maori regularization seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. Towards this person who was her life's benefactor, the 2 of them had more of a snuggling relationship. It could be said that if one of them was successful, the whole would be successful. If one of them was defeated, the whole would be defeated. If something happened to Ashikaga Yoshimasa, as his trusted aide, it would be difficult for him to have a foothold in the entire Japanese empire. He was more anxious than anyone else, and after a little hesitation, he made the decision to attack Ping and Beijing. In his opinion, once Ping and Beijing was captured, it would be tantamount to disrupting the 5-star army's formation, creating enough time for the great general to sober up and resume his command. This way, there was still hope for the overall situation to be salvaged. Only then would he be able to walk towards glory again. Full of ambition, Maori regularization appeared. He, who was walking at the front, suddenly stopped in his tracks. He waved his hand and gestured for everyone to stop moving forward. Then, he tilted his head to listen to something. Thump, 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 thump. The sound of hooves landing on the ground was endless, powerful, and orderly. It's cavalry. The experienced Maori regularization immediately voiced out his judgment. After he shouted, 2 groups of Japanese army soldiers came out from behind him. One of them held an iron shield, while the other held a strong bow. This was a well-trained army, and it was also what the Maori regularization relied on to conquer the world over the years. It was unknown how many times they had turned defeat into victory and how many contributions they had made. But now, they had finally met their match. The shield-bearers were in front, while the archers were behind, forming a human wall. Just as all of this was done, rows of black armored cavalry appeared in his line of sight. The cavalry only revealed their noses and eyes. From afar, they gave off a gloomy and cold murderous aura. The bright red 5-star flag fluttered in the wind. It was so eye-catching that the Maori regularization couldn't help but slightly squint his eyes. He had already expected it to be the 5-star army cavalry, but the appearance of the enemy still gave him a fright. With his many years of combat experience, he had a feeling that although the cavalry wasn't large in number, their combat strength wouldn't be too weak. Looking around, the originally nervous Maori regularization couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. It wasn't for anything else, but because he realized that the cavalry wasn't large in number. There were only about 1,000 of them, which gave him a sense of relief. So what if the 5-star army was powerful? So what if the cavalry was good at fighting? In the end, there were only 1,000 of them. 20,000 against 1,000. He was still full of confidence. Archers, prepare to attack from afar. Spearmen, prepare to engage the enemy in close combat. Shield bearers, support each other. As long as we can block their first wave of attack, victory will be ours. Maori regularization shouted loudly to reassure the soldiers. This was a normal tactic used to deal with cavalry. The other side only had 1,000 people. In Maori regularization's view, it wouldn't be difficult to stop them. If you don't understand your opponent, you will never know how powerful they are. The next scene showed the importance of knowing your enemy. Just when the Japanese army had finished their defense and looked down on the 1,000 cavalry in front of them, the black cavalry made their move. When they were 300 meters away, the first guard captain, Chio-V, who was at the front, took out a Type 95 pistol from his back. He then opened the safety and loaded the gun. All of this was done in an instant. The 400 soldiers beside him were doing the same thing. They didn't know how many times they had trained like this. For some people, it was already integrated into their lives. They could do it even with their eyes closed. The 400 Type 95 pistols were ready to fire. With the first gunshot from Cho-Woo's hand, they started to sweep the area and start the massacre mode. Shooting while on a horse, due to the unstable state of the body and the recoil of the gun, it would often cause the muzzle to deviate. Then, it would cause the bullets to run out. All of these could be made up for through continuous training. Not to mention, the Japanese army on the other side had already gathered together. As long as the general direction was not wrong, one shot could always hurt some people. Under the next 100 spears, this result was fully confirmed. Da-da-da, da-da-da. Under the sound of gunfire, bullets whizzed out and flew horizontally, landing in the camp of the opposite Japanese army. The defenseless Japanese soldiers fell one by one, and blood splattered one after another. The more bullets flew out, the more concentrated the gunfire became. This meant that more and more Japanese army soldiers were killed. Due to the density of the bullets, the Japanese army's battle formation first had individual soldiers fall to the ground after being hit. Then, like a contagious disease, a large area began to collapse. This was especially true for the Japanese army who had exposed themselves and were ready to attack with bows and arrows. They became living targets and became the first targets to bear the brunt of the firepower. Gunshots came one after another. In the short distance of 300 meters, the black cavalry soldiers changed at least one magazine, and at most 2 magazines. Bullets flew out like a dense rain, and the enemy's front door was wide open. The archers and lancers were in a mess. 2nd Battalion, move out with me. Dao Xiao, who had been waiting for an opportunity at the side, saw that the opportunity had arrived. He shouted and increased his pace as he charged forward. The reason why cavalry was so terrifying was because of their speed and power. When a man borrowed the power of a horse, he could easily unleash a strength that was several times greater than his own. This allowed him to be invincible. When a man borrowed the power of a horse, he could easily open up a path where there was no one. He could also kill the infantrymen like they were weeds. When the black cavalry unleashed these two advantages to the extreme, the Japanese army's infantrymen would collapse and fall into chaos. Compared to Chio-V's 1st Battalion, Dao Zhao's 2nd Battalion was more focused on attacking with momentum. Perhaps in terms of lethality, the cavalry sword was not as good as the 95 style. However, in terms of deterrence, the latter was much stronger. When the 400 black cavalry suddenly appeared in front of them, their warhorses leaped onto the heads of the shield-wielding Japanese army. Their swords flashed and landed on the heads of the shield-wielding Japanese army soldiers. As the swords flashed, the heads of the soldiers, who still had their eyes wide open, flew into the air. When the warhorses' hooves landed on the ground, the heads that had been separated from their bodies slowly fell to the ground. The smell of blood filled the air. Kill! Seeing that the 1st and 2nd battalions had succeeded, Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden cape, shouted. He led the remaining 200 black cavalry as the last remaining force and charged forward. At the same time, they were also the last straw that broke the camel's back. The sound of gunfire was still ringing out, but the swords had already arrived in front of them. At the same time, the black cavalry continued to approach them with their 7-star crossbows. They attacked again and again, catching the Japanese army off guard. They caught the Japanese army off guard and made the Japanese army dizzy. The 2,000 Japanese army in front of them quickly became stepping stones. They became the first batch of sacrifices on the battlefield. When they were all dead or had lost the ability to resist, more and more 5-star army soldiers came to the front of the formation. They were like torrential waves that constantly slammed against the weak sea wall. Waving the 4-foot-long sword that was larger than the ordinary cavalry sword, Yang Chendong rode on the white dragon as if he was in an unstoppable state. Every time he waved his arm and chopped down, there would be a large head flying into the sky. Every time the sharp cavalry sword fell and was raised, there would be streaks of blood flying everywhere on the battlefield. Under the leadership of Yang Chendong, with him as an example, the other black cavalry relied on their impenetrable armor to kill the enemy. They didn't care about defense at all. At this moment, their powerful lethality was displayed incisively and vividly. Finally, under the continuous slamming, the seawall began to show signs of collapsing. When the moment came, the 20,000 Japanese army was shocked by the power of the black cavalry. Some of them began to turn around and run out of fear. No one didn't cherish their life. After all, it was only once. Under the premise of not having faith, high positions and generous salaries were just flowers in the water. They couldn't be touched or touched. How could they be more important than their own lives? Come back, come back. When he saw more and more soldiers turn around and run away, the front line began to weaken, and then became a defeated army without any fighting power. Maori regularization shouted from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, although his voice was loud, it wasn't enough to call back the people's hearts. At this moment, the general's shout was just a catalyst that increased the speed of the soldiers' escape. It was as if everyone was afraid of being caught by the general and killed for the crime of desertion. All they did was run faster. Chapter 11:20. In the blink of an eye, not even half of the 20,000 soldiers were left. It wasn't that they didn't want to escape, but that they were too slow to escape, or they were entangled by the black cavalry and couldn't escape. Among them was the commander, Maori regularization. Maori regularization was a smart man. Many years of experience on the battlefield made him know when to advance and when to retreat. When he saw how brave and sharp the 5-star army was, he shouted a few times, but he still couldn't save the situation, so he made the decision to retreat. However, those few shouts had exposed his identity, and he was already being targeted. The one who targeted him was Beta Persei, the Yang family servant who had followed Yang Chendong for the longest time and always wanted to make contributions to the war. Protect the young master. Yang heir, who had locked onto his target, said to Badeo Jiang and Pang Yu. Then, he turned his horse around and headed straight for Maori Masashi's direction. At this moment, Maori regularization just turned around and left. Originally, as the commander, he was riding a horse, but at this moment, in order not to be noticed, he had already dismounted. Under the protection of his soldiers, he blended into the crowd of defeated soldiers and retreated. Old boy, where are you going? I'm going to kill you. Seeing that Maori regularization was about to escape, Beta Persei didn't want to let him go. His naturally loud voice was not inferior to Zhang Ida's voice on the Dangyang Bridge. After this roar, many of the Japanese army in front of him were frightened. This kind of momentum made many Japanese army directly throw down their weapons and kneel on the ground. Although there was only one black cavalry in front of them, many people still gave up the idea of resisting. "Get out of my way!" Beta Persei, who didn't put those small fries in his eyes at all, roared again. Then, he spurred his horse forward and jumped several times. Once, he even rushed over the head of a kneeling Japanese army soldier. The soldier was so scared that he closed his eyes and fainted on the ground. No one dared to stop the imposing Beta Persei, and no one would stop him. He smoothly arrived at a distance of 20 meters from Maori regularization. At this moment, the commander of the Japanese Empire also saw Beta Persei chasing after him. When he saw that Beta Persei's eyes seemed to be able to spit fire, he knew that it would be difficult for him to leave without killing this person. Maori regularization looked around and saw that there were no other black cavalry. He then looked at the 20 guards around him. A cruel sneer appeared in his eyes. "Don't be afraid. He's alone. Everyone, let's kill him together." Guards were supposed to protect the general, and they could die for the general at critical moments. Now that the order was given, more than 20 people surrounded him without saying a word. Beta Persei was not afraid of more than 20 people by himself. Not only that, but he also let out a hearty laugh under the dark mask. Good, come on, let me kill to my heart's content." Amidst the laughter, Beta Persei moved. The saber in his hand suddenly slashed out and landed on a nearby Japanese army guard, colliding with the saber that was about to be raised. They were both using sabers, but one side's strength was too great. When the two sides collided, the direct impact was that the saber was shattered. Then, Beta Persei's saber fell directly on the guard's chest, revealing a huge wound that was so deep that bones could be seen. With a slight force, the saber was pulled back, and Beta Persei continued to slash. At this moment, the sweat on the training ground was not in vain. During the training, he slashed 1,000 times a day, so every time he swung the saber, it was out of instinct. And every time he swung the saber, it would often bring about a spray of blood. At this moment, Beta Persei transformed into a god of death. Wherever he passed, there were corpses everywhere. This scene also scared the Maori regularization. Seeing that the number of soldiers around him was getting fewer and fewer, and there were less than 5 of them, he disappointedly turned around and fled again. "Where do you think you're going?" Seeing that the target he had painstakingly locked onto was about to escape, Beta Persei was not willing to give up and wanted to give chase. But the 5 guards surrounded him, and it seemed that they were going to risk their lives to stop him here. The shouting Beta Persei was angry. With a loud roar, he suddenly jumped off his horse, rolled on the ground, raised his saber, and cut off the legs of a guard, causing him to fall to the ground with a wail. Beta Persei, who had dismounted, was more agile. His saber was always slashing at a very tricky angle, which was not proportional to his tall figure. It was hard to believe that this was done by this person. Others could not believe it, and it gave Beta Persei a surprise advantage. In just a few seconds, the other 4 guards were all dead. At this moment, because Beta Persei had killed too many people, his black armor had long been dyed blood red. Jumping on his horse, Beta Persei once again chased after Maori regularization, who had run 100 meters away. Taking advantage of the time on his horse, he constantly adjusted his breathing to kill his final target in the most perfect state. To be able to follow by Yang Qindong's side, he had naturally learned many things. In addition, his own strength was already not bad. If he were to meet Maori Masanori head-on, he had 100% confidence that he would be able to take him down. He would not even need 3 moves. Strong people have confidence, but there are many things that you can't do well just because you are strong. If that's the case, then wouldn't the world always be dominated by the strong, and the weak have no way out? Just like now, although Beta Persei had enough confidence, Maori regularization was not to be trifled with. He had been a general for so many years, and he had always been valued by the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, so he was always in the center of power, so he had never been short of money, and there was indeed a group of loyal soldiers around him. Just like just now, the 5 people's fierce resistance was enough to explain everything. And just after Beta Persei killed 5 people, before he could catch his breath, Nearly 10 more Japanese army soldiers rushed from a distance and surrounded him. All of them were prepared to die, in order to create an opportunity for their General Maori regularization to escape. People say that even Qin Hui has 3 good friends, and it's true. After all, the Japanese army had the advantage in strength, and even if the Longwei soldiers were brave, it was impossible to kill all the Japanese soldiers in a short time. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Maori regularization finally escaped, but of course, he paid a high price. More than half of the soldiers who had followed him through life and death for many years died in this battle. Beta Persei, who was angry enough to kill all the Japanese army soldiers in front of him, cursed loudly, calling them cowards. His curses spread far and wide. With 1,000 against 20,000, the Dragon Guards once again showed everyone how powerful they were. Even though they had lost 200 to 300 people in this battle, their reputation was still their reputation. The Dragon Guards could not be blasphemed or offended. The Japanese soldiers fled, died, and surrendered. When the overall situation was settled, the other comrades who stayed in Ping and Beijing rushed out and took over the task of cleaning up the battlefield. When Yang Chendong saw that the overall situation was settled, he began to record the number of casualties. After learning that more than 200 people died and more than 100 were injured, he couldn't help but sigh. Although most of the casualties joined Longwei later, it was undeniable that no one who could enter this big family was simple. The loss this time was so heavy that it made him feel a little heartache. It seemed that Yang Chendong's mood was a little bad. Beta Persei, who was covered in blood, took the initiative to cheer him up. "Young master, don't worry. We will remember this hatred. It won't be long before we kill Maori regularization and avenge our brothers." "Yes, this hatred must be avenged." Yang Chendong nodded with a serious face, and his eyes fell on the distance. In this battle, they defeated the Japanese army and ate half of their main force. Then, it was only a matter of time before they conquered the Japanese Empire. Shajing City. In the temporary city lord's mansion, a somewhat thin man was standing in front of a large military map at the moment. As the army commander of the new Second Army, Shajing City and Jingzhou City had not stopped for a moment since they occupied the 2 cities. First, they rebuilt the city and stabilized the people, then promoted commercial development and opened factories in order to achieve the goal of rapid economic prosperity. Then, they gathered the morale of the army and prepared to send troops to the west. With the first city as a precedent, Shajing adopted the same strategy. First, they stabilized the foundation, then accumulated strength, and finally, they attacked the outside world. The idea was good, but changes came with it. Yang Chendong's sudden attack on the Japanese Empire caused Ming's dissatisfaction and even a crisis. The direct result was that the pressure on the new Second Army, which was very close to Ming, increased. It wasn't until Ming's Liaodong cavalry came out and reached an agreement with Nanming and Yesin that the new Second Army couldn't even keep their current territory, let alone expand outward. The city had been besieged and cut off from the outside world for more than 20 days. The situation in the city was getting worse day by day. As the situation became more and more serious, Shajing's thoughts became heavier and heavier, and the pressure became greater and greater. Just as he was standing in front of the map with a frown, the guard outside the door suddenly reported that the infantry division commander, Su Yuan, wanted to see him. Su Yuan was originally one of Shajing's infantry generals. He had been following him since Tao City was broken. Although his ability was average, after the establishment of the new Second Army, Shajing still helped him to get the position of a division commander. He could be considered as an absolute confidant. Hearing that Su Yuan came to see him, Shajing nodded and said to the guard in a somewhat hoarse voice, "Please." Su Yuan came. He was tall and had a tiger's light in his eyes. His cheekbones were somewhat wide, and he had a standard Mongolian face. When he entered the hall, a rumbling voice came from his mouth, "Military commander, I heard that you haven't eaten for a day. This won't do." Haha. Hearing his subordinate's words of concern, Shajing gently turned his head and forced a smile on his face. Then, he said in a similarly concerned tone, "Mr. Su, you also have to eat on time. Look at you. You've lost weight again." Chapter 11:21. Sigh. Isn't this an old problem? When we were guarding Tala City, which one of our brothers didn't experience the feeling of being hungry? From then on, we couldn't seem to gain weight. Haha, Su Yuan said with a laugh. After saying that, he withdrew the smile on his face and looked as if he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Su Yuan's words brought back memories of the past. She seemed to have returned to the past when she didn't have enough to eat and didn't have enough to wear clothes. Her expression revealed an unnatural sense of guilt. After all, he was a general in the army. He was responsible for the fact that his brothers didn't have enough to eat. The room also became silent for a while because of this topic. It wasn't until 5 or 6 breaths later that she recovered her composure and asked, "Mr. Su, are you here for something? Did something happen to the Ming army outside the city?" "No, it's not that," Su Yuan answered very quickly, but he did stutter a little. For some reason, his neck was flushed red. This scene fell into Shibi's eyes, and it made him very curious. He knew his subordinate very well. Although his ability was average, he had a straightforward personality. He wouldn't frown even if a knife was on his neck. What could be so difficult for him? With curiosity, Shibi asked, "Mr. Su, did something happen?" "This yes." Su Yuan, who didn't seem to know how to answer, simply admitted it directly. "Oh, what's the matter?" Seeing that Su Yuan had admitted to it, Shibi became even more curious. He wanted to know what had happened to make Su Yuan, who had always been straightforward, act so bashfully. In the face of Shibi's question, Su Yuan didn't immediately answer. Instead, he took a deep breath, then stared at Shibi and said, "General, now our new second armies Shajing City and Jingzhou City are surrounded by Ming, but I don't know if Bugnam of Gojoseon has any brilliant plan to help us out." When he heard this, Shibi shook his head and said, "I haven't received any new instructions from the 6th young master. I'm afraid we have to continue to wait." "Wait?" Hearing this answer, Su Yuan seemed to become a little excited at this moment. He said loudly, "General, the siege has been going on for more than 20 days. Not to mention whether Bai Ming's army will suddenly attack the city. The brothers in the city are already panicking. If this continues, I'm afraid." Without waiting for Su Yuan to finish his words, Shibi asked calmly, "Wait, what did you say happened to the brothers in the city?" This." Su Yuan seemed to be in a difficult position. His eyes revealed a complicated expression, but then he seemed to have thought of something and said with a very firm tone, "General, I won't hide it from you. Some of the brothers in the city can't take it anymore and have already started to think of other methods." "Other methods? What methods?" "Don't tell me they are surrendering to Bai Ming?" To be chosen by Yang Chendong, Shibi was very smart. He immediately thought of something. Su Yuan, who was still thinking of an excuse to talk about this matter, let out a long sigh of relief. There were some things that one was afraid of not saying out loud, so one had to be coy for a while. But once it was said out loud, nothing else mattered. At that moment, he straightened his face and said, "Yes, military commander is right, but it's not a surrender. Using Wu Nanwang's words, it's a battlefield uprising." "Battlefield uprising? Are you the leader?" Seeing how confident Su Yuan was when he said this, Shibi understood that his trusted subordinate was in Cao Cao's camp, but his heart was in Cao Cao's camp. "No, General is the leader." To Shibi's surprise, Su Yuan answered like this. For a moment, Shibi was stunned. Then, he shook his head seriously and said, "I've never said anything about a battlefield uprising, and I've never lowered my head to Bai Ming. But I don't know where Mr. Su heard this fake news from." "General, this is not fake news. Your subordinate is the one who made the decision for you. Of course, this is not my idea. It's the idea of some of my old brothers." It seemed like he had prepared his speech beforehand. When he said this, Su Yuan was very straightforward. As soon as he finished speaking, the hall once again became silent. Hearing the words, "old brothers," Shai's expression became inexplicably shocked. But at the same time, he thought of many things. He thought of the materials sent by the military inspectorate 2 days ago. It said that after the Bai Ming army besieged the city, Shajing City, which had just been restored to order, once again became chaotic. After the investigation by the inspectorate, the final target was the general's old brothers. They were the Mongolian veterans who had guarded Tala City together. It was because the matter involved these old veterans that the inspectorate did not make the decision to arrest them. Instead, they reported it to the general and asked him to make a decision. For the sake of their friendship as old brothers, for the first time, Bear Heart used public resources for personal gain to suppress the matter. Originally, he wanted to wait until the situation was less tense before he talked to his old brothers. But he didn't expect that they would take the initiative to look for him first. Naturally, the shock in his heart wasn't small, but he still couldn't understand why when they were defending Tala City, they didn't even have food to eat. But they still held on. Now that they hadn't reached that point, why were they thinking of surrendering? Confused, he looked at Su Yuan and asked, "Why?" "General, our brothers are really afraid of living a hard life again. In the past few years, everyone's life has become better. They have found wives, and some have even married several. Now, we are not alone like before. Everyone has too many scruples." When he answered this question, Su Yuan's eyes were a bit red. It seemed that he was not very willing. Shibi did not look at Su Yuan. Instead, he kept muttering, "Life is better, so we can't suffer anymore, right? Haha, it is really easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality." People were often like this. When they had nothing, they would go all out. Even if there was only a 1% chance, they would still dare to fight. On the other hand, when they had everything, they would not dare to take risks. Even if there was a 70% to 80% chance of success, they would still think twice. This was the case. His old brothers, who did not know what death was, were afraid of death. This was something that Shibi did not expect. Shibi lowered his head and pondered. His eyes were a bit red. He was really sad and disappointed. He did not expect that when he was in danger, the first to act was not someone else, but his most trusted old brothers. It was really difficult to judge a person's heart from his face. However, after a moment of silence, Shibi raised his head. When he looked at Su Yuan again, his expression was a lot more serious. "Old brothers, is this what you all mean? Have you thought about whether Ming will accept your surrender? What's the benefit of doing so?" "General, the Ming army said that as long as we surrender, everything will be fine. It is not impossible for our brothers to be promoted." Su Yuan quickly gave an answer to this question. It was precisely this answer that caused a glint of surprise to flash across Shi Baoer's face. He finally understood that Su Yuan had not come here casually. Instead, he already had a plan. Rather than saying that he wanted to discuss with him, it was more accurate to say that he had come to inform him. Then there was another problem. How did they know the Ming army's attitude towards him? With this confusion, Shibi asked, "Mr. Su, how did you know about this?" "I remember that the city gate has been closed for more than 20 days. Logically speaking, we should not be able to get in touch with the outside world. My old brothers deliberately let us go when they were guarding the city gate. Oh, by the way, there is a Ming merchant in the city called Rongshao. General, you should remember him. He is the middleman between us and Ming." As if he knew that it was wrong for him to not follow military discipline, Su Yuan only said this sentence once and emphasized Rongshao. Rongshao. Hearing this name, Shibi nodded. "I know this person. Since the new Second Army occupied Shajing City, many Ming merchants appeared here. Among them, Rongshao was the most famous one. It was because his business was very big and he was very rich. It was said that he had a lot of connections in the Ming army. Now it seemed that he was clearly a spy sent by them." Hearing that Shibi knew who Rongshao was, Su Yuan immediately said, "Yes, that's him. He was the first one who privately told his subordinates about the Ming army's attitude towards us." "What's your attitude? The 6th young master treated you well. Now that you are a division chief, are you still not satisfied?" Shibi said this with a somewhat angry and even a little harsh tone when it came to the issue of attitude. When talking about this matter, Su Yuan obviously became more confident. "Yes, I'm a division commander now, but this division commander position was only obtained through a request from a military commander. The new Second Army has 4 divisions in total. 3 of them are cavalry divisions. We are the only infantry division. Does this count as attaching importance to us?" Ha 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 ha. Hearing this answer, Shibi suddenly laughed a few times. At the same time, she asked, "Su Yuan, oh Su Yuan, It seems that you are still blaming the 6th young master for not being a cavalry division chief. Of course I blame him. We are a strong army galloping on the grasslands. Here, only cavalry can display its advantage. What's the matter with an infantry division? Does this count as attaching importance to us? When talking about this matter, Su Yuan's face was full of anger. Su Yuan was venting the anger in his heart. How could she not feel heartache? When the new Second Army was first established, he took the initiative to ask Yang Chendong to send a few fierce generals to him. Otherwise, he was really worried about the army's fighting strength. Because of this, Yang Chendong immediately agreed. The 3 cavalry division chiefs were all personally arranged by him, and they were all brave and resourceful people. As for the reason why Su Yuan was assigned to be the infantry division commander, it was actually because of his own selfishness. After all, there weren't many of his old brothers left. Relatively speaking, the infantry division was safer, which was why he made these arrangements. Chapter 11:22. He had never thought that his kindness would lead to such an outcome. At this moment, Shirbai did not know what to say. He even had an impulse to tell the truth. However, he knew that it was useless to say anything now that things had come to this. When a person had made up his mind to do something, it was not something that could be changed with just 1 or 2 words. More importantly, no matter what, Su Yuan had betrayed the 6th young master by saying these words. Such a person's loyalty was no longer there. Even if he was kept, he would not be of much use. He felt sad for Su Yuan's future, but Shirbai did not show it on his face. He was thinking about another problem, and that was whether he could use this matter to do something. He had been thinking of a way in front of the map, and now the opportunity had appeared. Mr. Su, this is a serious matter. I need to think about it. Also, I want to see Rong Xiao. There are some things that you can't say. I want to hear him talk about it face to face. The things that happened in Shajing City were still known to a small number of people. However, Yang Chendong was among this small number of people. 2 telegrams were sent to him one after another, and they both talked about this matter. The difference was that one was to complain, and the other was to propose a solution. The one who complained was the CIA of the Intelligence Department. This Intelligence Department was started by the 7th Madam, Su Munair. After continuous development, it had already begun to develop into both the military and the political. Just like the old brothers that Su Yuan mentioned, some of them married women who were peripheral members of the CIA. Most of these people came from poor backgrounds, and some even had a terrible past. They were rescued by the CIA, trained, and sent to different places. Their identities were quite confidential, and they had no contact with each other. It was considered top secret. When these old buddies began to take action and often gathered together to discuss things, some of their actions were already in the sights of the CIA. However, these people did not care at all. With pillow talk from the wives, these people's secrets were quickly learned. Then, layer by layer, they were finally reported to Yang Chendong. The other telegram was from Sherbet himself. Inside, he explained in detail what had happened and added his own opinions at the end. The gist of it was that they were faking their surrender in exchange for more time. When the 2 telegrams were delivered to Yang Chendong, he was in the middle of making arrangements to march to the northern part of the Japanese Empire. The 2 telegrams flashed through Yang Chendong's mind. Yang Chendong put them aside and continued to plan the previous battle plan. Generals, Ashikaga Yoshimasa has yet to recover from his injuries, and he has less than 300,000 soldiers under his command. At this moment, we already have the advantage in terms of military strength. Next, it's time to use all our strength to destroy them and end the war with the Japanese Empire. As the 6th young master commands, all the generals spoke in unison. Then, their gazes fell on the face of Yang Chendong, who was presiding over the military meeting. Clearly, everyone was waiting for the final military decision. Good. Seeing that everyone's morale was so high, Yang Chendong nodded heavily. After that, military orders were issued from his mouth, and the war with the Japanese Empire was one step closer. After the meeting was over, Yang Chendong instructed Beta Persei not to allow anyone to disturb him. He placed the 2 telegrams in front of him and read them seriously. It was said that a fortress was the easiest to be breached from the inside. Yang Chendong never denied this point. For this reason, he set up an inspection department in the military. There were political commissars in the cold front. There was also a political department at a higher level. There were also supervision departments and anti-corruption departments in local government affairs. These were to prevent any accidents from happening. And what should come would still come. Just like the anti-corruption in the future, there were endless waves of anti-corruption. Yang Chendong never thought that there would be no problems in his army and local government. That was something that even a saint could not do. After all, everyone had their own selfish motives. Otherwise, there would not be the saying that if one did not look out for himself, the heavens would take the hindmost. It could also be said that the matter of Su Yuan and the others had long been within Yang Chendong's expectations. It was just that he did not expect that the problem would appear in the new Second Army. Fortunately, Shibi did not let him down and did not betray him. This made Yang Chendong very gratified. He was sure that Shibi was not clear about the situation in the CIA. This made his approach even more commendable. Especially at the end of the telegram, Shibi pleaded for mercy for Su Yuan and the other old brothers. He only needed to beg for their lives. This showed his noble moral character. Sigh, the sky is going to rain, and the mother is going to get married. The 5-star army does not lack people. Let them be. With a long sigh in his heart, Yang Chendong made the final decision. Then, he waved his pen and sent a telegram back to Shibi, agreeing to all his actions. In accordance with the principle of not giving orders in foreign countries, he allowed Shibi to take the lead. If Shibi needed any help, Yang Chendong would do his best to satisfy him. After the telegram was sent to Beta Persei and Wang Shan secretly sent it out, Yang Chendong's gaze fell on the war in the Japanese Empire again. The overall situation of this war had basically been decided. The next step was just a matter of time. If the problem here could be solved earlier, the difficult situation of the new Second Army would be solved earlier. Yang Chendong felt a lot of pressure. Tokai Road, Seiko County. It was the central area of Tokai Road. At this moment, it had become the base camp of great General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was injured and unconscious, had already woken up a long time ago. Fortunately, he had a good physical foundation. He was only injured and did not endanger his life. It was just that when he woke up and learned the result of the war in front of him, he was so angry that he fainted again, which was depressing. When he woke up again and began to take charge of the military, the number of generals around him had decreased a lot. First, the sneak attack of the ninjas caused him to lose 20 capable confidants. Then, the defeat of the army outside Ping and Beijing caused him to lose half of his generals. Now, there were less than 20 people standing in the main tent, including General Maori Regularization, who gave up on attacking Shanin Road. At this point in the war, the high-spirited Ashikaga Yoshimasa had disappeared. In exchange, there was a somewhat decadent and spiritless great general. Everyone, let's talk about your opinions. After saying this, Ashikaga Yoshimasa slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, he seemed to be a little tired. Even the great general was behaving like this, so the generals below him didn't know what to say. In the face of such a situation, it seemed that no matter what they said, it would be wrong. Among the generals, only Maori Regularization's eyes had a trace of light, as if he was thinking about something. When the tent fell into silence, he suddenly took a step forward. Great General, this subordinate has a plan that may be able to solve the current situation. At this time, if someone was willing to give advice, how could Ashikaga Yoshimasa refuse? Especially when this person was his confidant, Maori Regularization. He immediately sat up straight and asked, "What plan do you have? Let's hear it." Maori Regularization nodded heavily, then said in a neither fast nor slow voice, "At present, the 5-star army has indeed gained a lot of advantages. For the first time, their number of troops has exceeded ours. Our Japanese empire is in imminent danger. But if you think about it carefully, the situation is not so. In the end, the 5-star army is just an armed force that is not willing to be recognized by Ming. In fact, they have a lot of weaknesses. What they lack is a foundation." When these words were heard by everyone, many people felt their eyes light up. At this moment, Maori Regularization's voice continued. "Although we seem to be weak, this is the entire Japanese empire. Now that we are fighting in our territory, we have the right time, the right place, and the right people. For a war like this, we can fight for years, decades, or even longer. But as the five-star army is an outsider, they are after all the invaders. Not to mention, they have a powerful enemy like Ming behind them. The so-called enemy of our enemy is our friend. We can take advantage of this. Correct. Hearing this, Ashikaga Yoshimasa finally said, "Our Japanese empire was originally a vassal state of the Ming dynasty. We are one of the non-conquering states. Not long ago, we once again expressed our intention to submit to Ming, and they also accepted us. At this moment, we are in danger, so they must help." Great General's words are correct. Now we only need to ask Ming for help, and even agree to let their troops enter our Japanese empire. In that case, the five-star army will be attacked from both sides, and the situation will be reversed. At that time, driving out the five-star army will not be a problem. Maori regularization also nodded and said in agreement. Well said. Great General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's expression changed, and he laughed. Once Ming's army enters the Japanese empire, the five-star army will not have any advantage. And if they still don't retreat, they will have to face a double attack from Ming and himself. In that case, it will be difficult for him to support the overall situation. More importantly, once Ming and the five-star army start fighting, it will create a disaster for the Japanese empire. This will create enough time for the Japanese empire to strengthen itself. And all he needs to do is to pay the price of his dignity. In the face of the powerful Ming dynasty, even if he bowed his head once, so what? The most important thing is to maintain his position. In that case, he will be able to rise again in the Japanese empire. As if he can already see the five-star army being forced to retreat, Ashikaga Yoshimasa laughed and immediately announced that he will immediately send people to Ming to ask for help. In order to obtain their support, he is willing to pay tribute every year, and he will not hesitate to send a large amount of money. Before, when Nankato was surrounded, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was not anxious. In his view, this was only a temporary problem, so he did not send people to build a ship and only asked for help from Ming. But now it is different. With the advantage of military strength gone, he can finally put down all his dignity and send people to find a ship to Ming. Chapter 11:23. The Japanese Empire was an island country. Not to mention the military's warships, even the civilian ships were innumerable. It was just finding some ships to send a message to Ming. It wasn't a big deal. For the sake of safety, 10 teams of envoys were sent out this time to guard against the five-star army's interception on the sea. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was really careful. The 10 teams of envoys scattered. Some of them were intercepted by the five-star army, so the news was leaked. But in the end, some ships were lucky enough to cross the sea and arrived at Ming. Through the intercepted ships, the five-star army knew about Ashikaga Yoshimasa's actions and reported it to Yang Chendong. Looking at the statements sent to him, Yang Chendong coldly snorted and said, "Just a trapped beast. Do you really think you can stop my army in this way? Humph. Beta Persei, send a report to Su Yojin. He should know what to do. Also, inform the frontline army to speed up their march. We don't have much time left." Ming Kyoto. The envoys of the Japanese Empire, who had weathered the waves, finally arrived here. Then they hurriedly sent a letter to the Ministry of Rights that was in charge of foreign affairs. In their opinion, the Japanese Empire was in danger. The Emperor of Ming should summon them soon. But they didn't expect that they would wait for several days. It wasn't that the letter didn't reach Zhu Qiyu's hands. Nowadays, the imperial power was still very prestigious. Even if the Minister of Rights was Hu Shao, Yang Chendong's father-in-law, he still didn't dare to suppress this matter. So the problem didn't come from the Ministry of Rights, but from the imperial court. After Zhu Qiyu saw the letter from the Ministry of Rights, he immediately called for a court meeting to discuss the matter of sending troops. What he didn't expect was that when it came to sending troops to the Japanese Empire, the reaction of the ministers was surprisingly similar. They all didn't agree to send troops. Among them, the Crown Prince's junior tutor, Grand Secretary and Minister of Justice Su Yojun was the most opposed. "Your Majesty, in order to resist foreign aggression, we must first pacify our internal affairs. We haven't even solved our own problems yet, so how can we possibly help the Japanese Empire? You have to think twice before making a decision. On the surface, Su Yozhin and Yang Qindong were irreconcilable enemies. Because of this, Zhu Qiyu deeply trusted and relied on Su Yozhin. Now that he was the first to speak, the other officials also began to chime in one after another. Your Majesty, young Master Su's words are reasonable. What we should do now is to solve the problem of Shajing and Jingzhou. We shouldn't divide our forces to help others. Yes, Your Majesty. According to the letter, the Japanese Empire is already on the brink of destruction. Even if we send troops now, how big of a problem can we solve? Yes. Fighting across the sea is disadvantageous to our supplies. Once something happens, it will be a big problem. Thinking about how the Japanese Empire would often invade our seas in the past, they deserve to be in trouble now. Everyone is right. I second the motion. I second the motion. All kinds of opinions appeared, but the general idea was the same. That was, they should not send troops to help the Japanese Empire. The so-called, the lips are cold and the teeth are cold, was certainly reasonable. However, Ming and the Japanese Empire were separated by the sea, so this statement was difficult to hold. Especially in the period when the marine industry was not developed, no one would feel any danger or threat. In their eyes, Ming's safety was the most important thing. At least, the Japanese Empire, a small vassal state across the sea, was not their concern. Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the golden dragon throne, originally had a solemn look on his face. When he saw the letter of Ashikaga Yoshimasa saying that he was willing to serve Ming for generations to come, and when he saw that the tribute would be doubled every year, he was a little tempted. Being able to gain fame and profit at the same time, this kind of thing was what the Supreme Emperor liked to do the most. However, he did not expect the officials to react so fiercely. This was really beyond his expectations. Of course, with his identity as the emperor, he could make all the decisions on his own, and the officials below could not say anything. However, right when he was exerting pressure on the five-star army and even had a great victory in front of him, it would not be a good thing if he disheartened the officials. Zhu Qiyu was naturally willing to help others without affecting herself. If she could gain fame and benefits, she would naturally be willing to do it. However, he did not want the Ming court to fall into instability because of this. At this moment, he became hesitant. Zhu Qiyu did not know that after Su Yozhan received the telegram from the Security Bureau, he immediately did a lot of work. Ever since he chose to follow Yang Qindong, he was wholeheartedly loyal to the five-star army. At the same time that Zhu Qiyu was forcefully withholding the salaries of the officials, he used the money that Yang Qindong gave him to rope in many people. Right now, at least a fifth of the officials in the court had received benefits from him. At this moment, it was time to show off his power. He had secretly contacted many people, and under the reasonable, polite explanation, there were many people who followed his lead blindly. For example, in the court now, those who spoke first were all arranged by him. Under the guidance of public opinion, some officials who did not know what was going on were also persuaded and expressed their own opinions. Yang Qindong's plan was effective. Considering that there were too many objections in the court, Zhu Qiyu did not bring up the matter of sending troops. He only said that he was thinking about it. Using this time, Yang Qindong commanded the five-star army to gallop on the battlefield of the Japanese Empire, reducing the territory and strength of the Japanese army. It had been more than 20 days since the last time he sent out a request for help, and there was still no news that was beneficial to him. Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was originally sitting in the military tent, could no longer sit still. He once again called his trusted subordinate, Maori Regularization, to discuss how to solve the crisis. When there were only two people in the tent, Ashikaga Yoshimasa said, "This general wishes to send someone to send a letter to Nankeido's Kuroda and have him come to meet us. What do you think?" When Ashikaga Yoshimasa finished speaking, Maori Regularization's body clearly tensed up. The Japanese Empire's navy was still very strong, and they had a lot of soldiers. Right now, there were at least 300,000 Japanese Empire's navy in Nankeido. This was also the foundation of the Japanese Empire's navy. It's just that the five-star army's navy was more powerful, especially the cannons on the ship had a longer range, so they didn't display their strength. But even so, the Five-Star Army's navy didn't underestimate the strength of the Five-Star Army. There was news that came back that the Five-Star Army in Nankato didn't attack, which was enough to explain everything. It was impossible for Ashikaga Yoshimasa not to know this, but now, he wanted to transfer the navy out. Didn't he know that if he took the initiative to break through the siege, he would suffer heavy losses? But he still wanted to do this. The meaning behind it was a little bit personal. Maori Regularization's mind quickly thought of a possibility, that is, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was really afraid of the Five-Star Army, so he left himself a way out. After all, with the help of the navy, they would have the ability to leave the Japanese Empire at any time. In addition to here, they could choose a new place to live. And without the help of a powerful navy, everything would be impossible. Could it be that the admiral is already prepared for the worst? Maori Regularization looked up at Ashikaga Yoshimasa and nodded. This is also good. Although we will suffer some losses, it's not a long-term solution. Since Ashikaga Yoshimasa has already made a decision, even if Maori Regularization wanted to stop it, it would be difficult for him to do it. If he didn't do it well, he would offend the admiral, which would be very bad for his future. Maori Regularization agreed, which wasn't beyond Ashikaga Yoshimasa's expectations. He smiled and said, "Very well, things are settled like this." Ashikaga Yoshimasa was indeed prepared to lose and escape. In the face of the powerful offensive of the Five-Star Army, he knew that some things were irreversible, especially after he didn't get a reply from Ming. This idea became even more firm. But what he didn't expect was that this backup plan accelerated the collapse of the entire Japanese army. Unlike the Five-Star Army, who had a radio station that was beyond this era, there were only two ways to send a letter to the Kuroda family. One was to send a letter by carrier pigeon, and the other was to send someone to deliver the letter. For the sake of insurance, both methods were used, and it was this decision that gave the Five-Star Army time to prepare in advance. A carrier pigeon in the sky was not so easy to catch, especially a well-trained carrier pigeon. But this thing was not completely guaranteed. Accidents like carrier pigeons were not uncommon. In order to double insurance, Ashikaga Yoshimasa sent an inconspicuous civilian ship to Nankato. Things went bad because of this civilian ship. The outskirts of Nankato were already completely sealed off. Even Han Chinese civilian ships and merchant ships were not allowed to pass inspection, let alone a civilian ship of the Japanese Empire. So under the strict inspection, the messenger was found, and the matter of the Supreme General giving the order to break out of the encirclement was no longer a secret. His subordinates immediately reported the situation to Yang Chendong with a telegram. After hearing this, Yang Chendong, after serious consideration, decided to beat them at their own game. If everything was peaceful on the grasslands, Yang Chendong was not prepared to give any Japanese army a way out. They could only choose to surrender or die. But now, the situation on the outskirts was not good, and the new Second Army could face a big problem at any time. Time waited for no one, and the Japanese Empire's matter had to be solved quickly. Among them, the Japanese Naval Division was an existence that gave Yang Chendong a great headache. 300,000 soldiers, a great advantage in terms of numbers, plus the existence of small cannons, it would not be easy to bite this hard bone. In addition, this Kuroda was not someone to be trifled with. According to the intelligence personnel hidden in Nankato, the security there was stable, which eliminated the possibility of an internal attack. Yang Chendong was worried about how to deal with this group of Japanese army and how to occupy Nankato to solve his own problems. However, the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's order made him see an opportunity. Chapter 11:24. Even if they didn't have a big appetite and couldn't swallow the Japanese Naval Division, they could at least chase them away and occupy the whole of Nankato. After Yang Chendong thought about it again and again, he sent a telegram to give the messenger from the Japanese army a chance to escape and send the information to Kuroda. Under Yang Chendong's arrangement, the messenger successfully escaped and smoothly entered Nankato. At this time, Kuroda had already received the order from the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa through a carrier pigeon. At this moment, he was thinking of a plan of action. The messenger's appearance let Kuroda know that the Five-Star Army already knew about the plan. In a fit of anger, he directly killed the messenger. After all, The biggest advantage of an army's action was the suddenness. But now that it was gone, how could he not be angry? Of course, this was all done by the Supreme General. He only did it for double insurance. After killing the messenger to vent his anger, Kuroda had to consider the matter of breaking out of the encirclement. Although he knew that the five-star army was already prepared, the Supreme General's order couldn't be disobeyed. The most important thing was that he didn't know what kind of problems would arise if he was trapped for a long time. 5 days later, Kuroda, who had prepared everything, gave the order to break out of the encirclement. 300,000 soldiers boarded 1,000 warships carrying provisions, supplies, and silver. They suddenly left Nankato and headed towards the sea. The ones responsible for stopping them were the elite High 4 Division and High 5 Division of the Five-Star Army. In addition, there were 30,000 soldiers from the Korean Navy. In total, there were less than 50,000 soldiers. Facing the 300,000 Japanese army, even if they were prepared and had the advantage of artillery, they still couldn't stop them all. In the end, after 3 days and 3 nights of battle, only half of the Japanese army's forces were left behind and escaped. After that, the 2 division commanders sent a telegram to Yang Chandong to ask for forgiveness. However, Yang Chandong, who had already expected this result, didn't blame them. Instead, he rewarded them and gave the order to continue the chase. He wanted to use the speed and weapons advantage of the warships to continue attacking. In the end, he wanted to achieve the goal of blowing the Japanese naval division out of the Japanese Empire. The battle on the sea continued, and the 2 sides on land also fought back and forth many times. The Japanese army's morale was already broken, and the people's morale was already broken. The situation had already tilted a lot in the Five-Star Army's favor. If this continued, it was only a matter of time. The war in Wanation began to move toward the final stage. The situation on the grassland became more and more serious. The Second Army's courtyard. This was the 3rd time Rongshao's appearance. The first 2 negotiations between the 2 sides did not go well, or it could be said that Xiajia was intentionally raising his status and delaying the negotiations. This time, Rongshao had already made the final decision. If they didn't surrender, they would fight. Too much time had passed, and he had already lost his patience. Or perhaps the people behind him had already lost their patience. In the end, Shajing City and Jingzhou City only had the 5-star army. The 4 divisions added together only had a little more than 30,000 people. Ming had already spent a lot of time and energy on them. For the higher-ups of Ming, it would be best if they could recruit this new force. But if it really didn't work, they couldn't rule out the possibility of using force. It was precisely because the higher-ups were a little impatient that Rongshao's attitude was a lot stronger than the previous 2 times. After doing business for so many years, Rongshao had developed the ability to speak with people and ghosts. His smiling face had always been harmless, but the words that came out of his mouth were very sharp. General Shi, I wonder what you've thought about it since it's been such a long time. You should know that Ming has already stationed 200,000 soldiers outside of Shajing City. We can attack whenever we want, and we have the ability to break through at any time. When he said this, the smile on the chubby Rongshao's face had already disappeared. Instead, he looked like he was going to attack if Zhang Heng didn't give him an accurate answer. Facing the aggressive Rongshao, Jia Bei knew that he did not have much time left. If he delayed any longer, it was very likely that things would go south. After thinking for a while, he said, "All right, I can agree to your proposal of a battlefield uprising, but please give me some time. You should know that although I am the commander of the new Second Army, other than Su Yuan, the other 3 division commanders were all arranged by Bugnam of Gojoseon. If I don't convince them, this matter won't work at all. You don't want to see a new Second Army that kills each other come to Ming, right?" The reason given by Jia Bei was very appropriate. Rongshao had also investigated the identities of the other 3 division commanders, and they were indeed arranged by Yang Chandong himself. These 20,000 cavalries were a very powerful force. If they were given up just like that, the matter would not be perfect, and Rongshao's personal contribution would also be reduced. He immediately nodded and said, "All right, but I need an accurate time." 1 month. Jia Bei gave an answer after thinking about it for a while. "No, at most 10 days. Rongshao refused in a businessman's tone. In the end, after bargaining between the two, 20 days was the norm. In other words, after 20 days, if Jia Bei still could not lead the new Second Army to Baiming, then the Baiming army outside the city would launch a military operation. First city. As the largest city under Yang Xie's influence on the grassland, and also one of the earliest cities built, it was still prosperous. Although the external environment was a bit tense during this period, the people living in the city were not affected much. This naturally had an inseparable relationship with the powerful new army stationed here. As the highest leader of the military department other than Yang Chendong, Tiger's Mane fully showed enough ability to manage the new army in an orderly manner. Even the rampant Baiming Liaodong cavalry never had the intention to attack them. Even when they took action, they would often be 200 miles away from First City. It was also because of this arrangement that the two sides had the intention of not interfering with each other. But even so, Tiger's Mane did not mean to be proud at all. On the contrary, he was not in a good mood for a while. It was all because of the matters in Shajing City and Jingzhou City. Rong Xiao was indeed a qualified businessman. He knew how to maximize his benefits. Ever since he started to come into contact with the new Second Army, he kept releasing all kinds of unfavorable remarks. Just yesterday, a new piece of news came out, saying that it wouldn't be long before the heavily besieged new Second Army would fall into the arms of Northern Ming. When the news came out, Tiger's Mane naturally did not believe it. He did not even send a telegram to Yang Chendong. He knew that these things would naturally be handled by the intelligence department. What he had to do now was to deal with all kinds of accidents that might happen next. In the new army's military department in the city, Tiger's Mane invited the city lord, Yu Mian, and the logistics division commander, Yang Si, to sit down in a very quiet room. Yang Si, as the person in charge of logistics and with the lowest position, should be doing the work of pouring tea. While pouring tea for Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian, he did not stop talking. The two of you, looking at your frowns, you don't really think that Commander Shi will defect to the enemy, right? Hee, even if you don't believe him, you should believe in the young master's judgment. Yes, I have also come into contact with this person, and I know him better. He probably won't betray the sixth young master. Yu Mian also agreed. Probably. Tiger's Mane chuckled and shook his head. Didn't you hear what the sixth young master said? There is no such thing as loyalty. It's just a matter of whether the bargaining chip for betrayal is enough. After all, this Shibei is not Han, nor is he our old brother. Now that he is heavily surrounded by the Baiming army, I wouldn't be surprised if he did anything to protect himself. After Tiger's Mane finished speaking, Yu Mian fell silent. Actually, from his words, it could be seen that he did not have much confidence in himself. What he said was just to unite everyone and not to casually suspect his colleagues. But now, even Tiger's Mane said that he was suspicious. Of course, it was not good for him to say anything. Yang Si, on the other hand, frowned after hearing this. He had already finished pouring tea and came down from the table. His right hand gripped a teacup tightly as he thought of something and said, "Since all of you are suspicious, why don't you report this to the young master? The young master must already know. It's just that he hasn't sent a letter yet. This is the part that we can't figure out." Tiger's Mane said as he shook his head. And? After Yang Si heard this, he was stunned at first. He didn't know what to say next. If even the sixth young master could not confirm the authenticity of this matter, then this matter was probably more than 50% true. Yang Si fell into deep thought and did not speak. Yu Mian thought of something and said, "If that's the case, then we should also make preparations early. Once something really happens to the new Second Army, I'm afraid that the next target Baiming will deal with will be us." With the new Second Army stationed in Shajing and Jingzhou City, this was equivalent to planting a stair on the grassland. Baiming had to be cautious if they wanted to make a big move. But once this constraint was gone, everything would be very different. They could concentrate all their energy on dealing with the first city and the new army. With their supplies cut off, the situation of the new army would only become more and more dangerous. That's right, that's what I'm worried about. That's why I called you guys over to see if there's any good strategy. Tiger's Mane nodded heavily. Obviously, he had thought of all this. He called the two of them over to discuss this matter. After the matter was settled, the three of them gathered together to come up with a plan. At this moment, Yang Qindong, who was far away in the Japanese Empire, had indeed received a telegram from the intelligence personnel of the first city. It described some of the rumors they had heard in detail. However, because the two cities of Shajing were heavily surrounded, they were unable to find out the specific and real situation. Therefore, they reported everything they heard regardless of whether it was true or false. Chapter 11:25. Looking at the contents of the telegram in his hand, Yang Qindong's eyes flashed with a sharp light. In his heart, he had sentenced Rong Xiao to death. All along, Yang Qindong had a natural closeness to the Han people. Even though they were both merchants, the treatment of the Han merchants was much better. Whether it was the price of goods or the ratio, it was much higher than that of the foreign races. For this reason, many people had raised objections, but he had ignored them. It could be said that this policy had allowed many Han merchants to earn a lot of money, and Yang Qindong's reputation had always been very good. However, when the forest was big, there were all kinds of birds. There were still some people who were not satisfied. They even secretly went against Yang Qindong. Rong Xiao was a typical representative of this. Of course, without Rong Xiao, there would still be Wang Xiao and Li Xiao. However, who told him to run into the muzzle of the gun? If he did not punish this person, such things would inevitably happen again in the future. In order to achieve the effect of killing one to appease the 100, Rong Xiao had already been put on the death list. Putting Rong Xiao's matter aside, Yang Qindong needed to consider and judge the situation of the new second army that was surrounded and what the truth was. Even though before this telegram, Shirbi had already sent a telegram and told him everything. However, when a general was outside, military orders could not be given. Who could guarantee that what Shirbi said was true and not a ploy to stall for time, and not just to brush him off? It was still the same saying. Loyalty depended on the bargaining chip. At least for now, Yang Qindong couldn't give up anything. Even if he could, before the crisis was resolved, it was just an illusion. It was just an empty check. Whether Shirbi could be trusted or not was a problem that Yang Qindong had to consider. If he made a mistake in his judgment, everything that followed would be useless. Yang Qindong thought about the first time they met and how he had promoted the other party to a commander. He felt that he had done enough and was sincere enough. Feeling that he had not done anything wrong, Yang Qindong raised his eyebrows and said in his heart, "I have done what should be done. Next, let's bet that my judgment of people is not wrong. I hope you can withstand the test." Yang Qindong, who seemed to have made a decision in his heart, called Beta Persei. He wanted to send a telegram to Tiger's Mane of the new First Army to ask him to pay more attention to Shirbi's situation. At the same time, he had to prepare for the city defense battle now. Although the new Second Army's matter was big, it was far away, and there was nothing he could do. However, the problem of the Japanese army in front of him was something that needed to be solved. If he got stuck in this quagmire, he was afraid that it would not only be the new Second Army that would have problems, but more problems would appear. After seeing Beta Persei return after sending the telegram, Yang Qindong asked, "How's the situation in Nanhai province?" "Young master, the people who moved out are moving in, but the area there is not small. It will take at least a month to distribute the land and restore order." Beta Persei reported in a deep voice. "Okay." Yang Qindong nodded to show that he knew, and then asked, "Which army is responsible for the cleanup work?" "Young master, it's under the command of Commander Nyo Duo." "Okay. Order Nyo Duo to take a boat to Ping and Beijing quickly. By the way, send a telegram to the Security Bureau in Ming's Kyoto." When Yang Qindong said this, a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. Obviously, the matter of the new Second Army made him a little angry, and he was ready to start a massacre. Ming's Imperial Palace. Acting Sect Master Zhu Qiyu was in a good mood recently. It was all because of the news that came from the grassland that Rong Xiao had already convinced the commander of the new Second Army of the Five-Star Army, Shibiao. In 20 days, they might raise their army and surrender. If that was the case, he would not have to pay any price to gain an extra army of troops. Comparing the two, he would have a greater advantage in suppressing the Five-Star Army's forces. Once the Great Ming Empire suffered heavy losses and finally dealt with the Five-Star Army, he would lead a strong army to the south to solve the problem of the South Ming Empire. If he could also solve the problem of the South Ming Empire, then the Great Ming Empire would regain its former glory in his hands. Thinking about how great of a feat this would be, it was really exciting. Just as he was in a good mood, Chief Eunuch Jining appeared. Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's junior tutor Su Yozhen said that he has an urgent matter to discuss with you. What do you think? Oh, send him in. Hearing that Su Yozhen had come, Jining nodded. He admired this official who could do things. Not long after, Su Yozhen appeared in the main hall of the imperial palace. He first knelt and kowtowed, and then he stood up with a serious expression. Beloved official Su, you don't look too well. May I know why you've come? Zhu Qiyu asked in a nonchalant manner. Your Majesty, this official has come for a matter related to Bai Ming's reputation. I really have to say it. Seeing how solemn Su Yozhen was, Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, also straightened his body and asked, What's the matter? Yes, Your Majesty. Su Yozhen held the ceremonial tablet and said, Your Majesty, this official has come to ask for forgiveness. What's going on? Zhu Qiyu, who was confused by these words, asked, Your Majesty, it's like this. Previously, when the Japanese Empire asked for help, this official spoke out in court to stop it. At that time, I didn't do anything wrong. After all, the most important thing in court right now is to solve the problem of the grasslands and achieve the goal of dealing a heavy blow to the five-star army. But now, it seems that this official's vision was a bit short-sighted. Su Yozhen said with an apologetic attitude, Why do you say that? Zhu Qiyu was a bit stunned. He had already put the matter of the Japanese Empire's request for help to the back of his mind. He really didn't think that Su Yozhen would bring it up again. Su Yozhen was naturally instructed by Yang Qindong to come. Before he came, he had already thought of the words to say. He immediately said, Your Majesty, this official has not thought things through. After a self-reflection, he continued, Ever since the Japanese Empire sent people to ask for help, there have been all kinds of rumors. But most of them are accusing us of not helping our vassal state, especially the people from the Wara Empire stationed in the capital. They have mentioned this matter more than once in public. The Japanese Empire was a vassal state of the Great Ming Empire. Now that they were in danger, Bai Ming chose to not help them. Thinking about it, as the current Bai Ming's partner, how could Yesen of the Wara not have any thoughts? If this matter was not handled well, it would greatly affect the cooperation between the two sides. Su Yozhen used this as an excuse to speak out. It couldn't be more appropriate. After listening to this, Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but frown. Although Bai Ming was not as good as it used to be, and even the surrounding vassal states were almost devoured by the five-star army, he had to consider the feelings of the other party. He didn't expect that the Japanese Empire's matter would attract the attention of Yang Qindong of the Wara. Now that they were cooperating, Zhu Qiyu, who didn't want to make things worse, immediately asked Su Yozhen, Su Yozhen, if this is the case, do you have any ideas? Your Majesty, I have a plan that can shut the mouth of the Wara with the smallest price. Hearing that he was finally asked, Su Yozhen answered without hesitation. Speak. Yes. I think we should send an army to the Japanese Empire to show that Bai Ming will not give up on our vassal states. As for this army, there doesn't need to be too many people. It's mainly for show. If there is any danger, then retreat immediately. That way, no one will be able to say anything. Which army? Zhu Qiyu asked with interest. Your Majesty, didn't you just set up a navy? There are only 50,000 people, which is neither more nor less. Let them go to the periphery of Neon and they can test the army. It's the best of both worlds. Su Yozhen replied with a smile on her face after she finally expressed her thoughts. Since the five-star army has been growing, especially after they first took down North Korea and then attacked the Japanese Empire, the safety of the sea has also attracted Zhu Qiyu's attention. He spent a lot of money to build a 50,000-person navy and at the same time lifted the ban on the sea. He was ready to build something on the sea. In Zhu Qiyu's opinion, even if they can't dominate the sea like the five-star army, they should at least have the power to protect themselves and have their own voice. Therefore, this 50,000-person navy was established, and the people chosen were all people who were excellent in the water. It took a lot of effort. This 50,000-person navy can be called the prototype of the Bai Ming Navy. Once it is done, it will continue to grow. Therefore, when he heard that he was going to send this precious army to the battlefield of the Japanese Empire, Zhu Qiyu was a little against it. Su Yozhen saw that Zhu Qiyu didn't make a decision immediately, so she knew what the other party was thinking. She continued to say, "Your Majesty, from a weak army to a strong army, it has to go through all kinds of training. This trip to the Japanese Empire is one of them. Besides, if things go wrong, we can withdraw in time. Just treat it as a training at sea. We can use this opportunity to shut the mouths of others. Isn't it a good thing?" And Zhu Qiyu thought about it carefully and felt that there was a certain degree of truth, so he nodded. "Good, since that's the case, I will discuss it with the officials of the Ministry of War." Zhu Qiyu said this, which meant that he agreed. It was not the late period of the Great Ming dynasty, and now the imperial power was still relatively unified. Especially in the use of the army, they had the power to keep their word. "Sure City." Yang Chendong sent a telegram. There were not many words, and it could even be said that there was only one sentence. "Observe closely, prepare to defend the city, and act at your discretion during special times." The so-called act at your discretion was equivalent to giving all the power to Tiger's Mane. This was a trust, but at the same time, it was also a pressure. Chapter 11:26. It was conceivable that if the matter was not resolved properly, Tiger's Mane would inevitably be blamed by others. However, at this time, Tiger's Mane could no longer care so much because he had received accurate information that the Biming emissary had begun to negotiate with them. They had agreed to make a final decision within 20 days at the latest. Now, it seemed that there were only 17 days left. It was naturally Rong Xiao who took the initiative to be able to obtain accurate information. He deliberately opened a hole in the siege and allowed a group of people from Shajing City to walk out. As expected, there were intelligence personnel from the 5th Star Army among them. As soon as he received the news, Tiger's Mane called Yu Mian and Yang Si. The three of them discussed together how to deal with the complicated situation that could change at any time. The three of them first listened to the report of the intelligence personnel who had escaped from Shajing City. When they learned that their people had seen the merchant Rong Xiao appear in the residence of the northern Ming emissary with their own eyes, and when they saw him being escorted out with a smile, the three of their faces turned somewhat ugly. The one who had the most intense reaction was Yang Si. He suddenly slammed the table and reprimanded loudly, "What does this Biming want to do? To think that the young master trusts him so much. He actually dares to collude with foreign enemies and rebel. This is really intolerable." "That's right. I didn't expect him to be such a person." Yu Mian quickly agreed. At the same time, he also looked very angry. Tiger's Mane's expression was not much better, but he knew that this was not the key point now. Once the new Second Army really joined Biming, then the first city would become the next target. With the supply completely cut off, how to deal with this complicated situation was what he needed to consider. As for other matters, regardless of whether it was true or not, the sixth young master would naturally deal with it. "Both of you, calm down first. Let's think about our own problems first. Once the two cities of Shajing and Jing province are obtained by Biming, they will have nothing to worry about. The next step is to send troops to the beginning city. At that time, do the two of you have any countermeasures?" Listening to Tiger's Mane's words, Yang Si replied without hesitation, "What else is there to think about? Of course, we'll deal with whatever comes our way. Our beginning city is not like Shajing City and the other two cities. We're heavily guarded here, and we also have a united army and people. We're not afraid of any enemy's invasion." "Yes, our beginning city is not afraid of any enemy. Let's just fight." Yu Mian's heroic spirit seemed to have been aroused at this moment. His voice was like a bell as he spoke. All right, this was what Tiger's Mane wanted. As long as everyone had the same attitude and cooperated with each other, there was nothing that couldn't be done. There was no enemy that couldn't be defeated. Just as the situation on the grassland became very complicated, the war on the battlefield of the Japanese Empire was in full swing. After Yang Chendong issued the order for a general counterattack, more than 200,000 soldiers of the 5-Star Army launched a crazy counterattack. In addition to the cooperation of more than 100,000 soldiers of Sensei Naganabu and Fukada Tani, Their total strength had surpassed the troops of Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Having more troops than the other party did not mean that they would definitely win. However, the strength of the morale of the army and the strength of their combat power were enough to show that the scales of victory and defeat had tilted greatly. After the army left Ping and Beijing, they went straight to the north and came to the Dongshan Road. They separately conquered Jinjiang County, Mino County, Shindu County, and other places. They directly suppressed Ashikaga Yoshimasa's troops in the Musashi area of the Donghai Road. On the sea, President Kuroda's 300,000 soldiers broke through the encirclement. Although they had the advantage in terms of military strength, in the face of the powerful artillery of the C-4th Division and the C-5th Division, they fled all the way. When the 300,000 soldiers entered the Dongshan Road, there were only 100,000 soldiers left. On the land, they lost many cities and lost many soldiers. Of the 300,000 soldiers, there were only 100,000 left. Under such a situation, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who originally had millions of soldiers, only had 200,000 soldiers left. The reduction in his strength made him anxious every day. While he cursed the five-star army for being arrogant, he also made preparations to abandon his homeland and leave the Japanese Empire. Compared to the Japanese Empire's continuous losses, the five-star army was like an unstoppable hurricane. Wherever they went, they would not hesitate to kill anyone who resisted. Along the way, who knew how much blood they had shed. In the end, the forces that opposed the five-star army were all in danger. Most of them had no choice but to surrender, while a small number of them fled. Based on the current situation, in at most 3 months, the entire Japanese Empire would be conquered by the five-star army. After taking half a year to migrate and exchange people, it was inevitable that Japan would become another province under the five-star army. However, at this time, a telegram suddenly appeared. At the same time, the 1st Cavalry Division, New Army, and the 4th Division were all transferred back to Ping and Beijing. When the telegram was sent out, all of the generals on the front lines who received the news were confused. Seeing that victory was right in front of them, they did not know why such an order would appear. Although the five-star army had over 300,000 soldiers, the only ones that could fight were the 4th Division, the 7th Army, the 1st Cavalry Division, the New Army, and the 1st Reserve Division. The rest of the soldiers, such as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Divisions, as well as the hundreds of thousands of miscellaneous Japanese soldiers, were left behind to pick up the leftovers. Many of them were even cleaning up the battlefield. Now that 3 powerful armies were suddenly transferred away, it was inevitable that the generals would have all sorts of guesses. However, no matter what thoughts they had, this telegram was personally sent out by Yang Chundong. Just based on this point, no one dared to disobey. After being surprised for a moment, the 3 armies packed up and stopped moving forward. Then, within 8 hours, they began to change direction, going from north to south to Ping and Beijing. This was the military order of the five-star army. Once an order was given, regardless of the situation, it must be obeyed. This was also something that Yang Xie's generals had to do. In the blink of an eye, the 3 powerful armies left. Although the total number of soldiers was not large, only around 50,000, it was still a big blow to the morale of the army. The 7th Army's commander, Tian Su, took the initiative to look for the 1st Reserve Division's commander. Suku de Sukude was also a division commander, and the 1st Reserve Division soldiers were 30,000, far more than the 7th Army's 10,000 soldiers. However, Sukude gave Tian Su enough respect. After all, he was a member of the Cold Front series, fully equipped with firearms. "Commander Tian, please have a seat." In the face of Tian Su's visit, Sukude did not dare to be negligent and took the initiative to walk out of the tent to welcome him. "Commander Su is too polite." Tian Su had a smile on his face. He was very satisfied with Sukude's attitude. Since Sukude was so polite, he naturally would not refuse. Instead, he took the initiative to slow down his pace, trying to keep up with Sukude's pace. Everyone else in the tent left. When only the 2 of them were left, the smiles on their faces involuntarily disappeared. 3 out of 5 powerful armies had left. The 2 of them felt an enormous pressure. If a problem appeared in their originally sure-win situation because of this, it would mean that the 2 of them were incompetent. This made them unusually nervous and cautious. They looked at each other. In the end, it was Tian-su who spoke first. Commander Su, 3 out of 5 powerful armies have left. The pressure on our shoulders will be much greater. Yes, but we are not afraid, Sukuda said in a booming voice. Our 1st Reserve Division has 30,000 soldiers. They are all veterans who have experienced life and death on the battlefield. Although they are not as elite as the Cold Front, we have courage and courage. We are not afraid of any opponent or enemy. Well said, Tian-su said happily as he waved his fist in the air. Soldiers should be like this. They should have the courage to press forward. Just like the 6th young master said, when enemies meet on a narrow path, the courageous will win. As long as we are willing to fight with our lives on the line, we can defeat even the heavens and the earth. Ha ha ha, Commander Su's words are very much to my liking. Sukuda laughed heartily. With a good start, the rest of the conversation became much easier. As the two of them continued to talk, they quickly reached a consensus on how to fight the next battle. One by one, they came up with a military plan. As for Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was preparing to leave Musashi Prefecture, he was sighing in sorrow. He was sitting on a chair and sighing with grief. He really couldn't understand. This was clearly his home ground, and he had close to 1 million soldiers. How could he be defeated by a mere 200,000 5-star soldiers? But now, the enemy's numbers were increasing as they fought. Why was he getting weaker and weaker? What was the reason for this? Was it simply because the enemy's weapons were too powerful? Even now, Ashikaga Yoshimasa still didn't know what it meant to win the hearts of the people. He thought that power was a high and mighty thing. As long as he grasped it tightly, he could do whatever he wanted. However, he did not know who gave him power. When a person with power did not use it to serve the people, he would not be far from death. Just as he was sighing, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from outside the tent. Then, a happy Maori regularization appeared and shouted, "Great General, good news, good news." Good news? What good news can there be at a time like this? Ashikaga Yoshimasa said disapprovingly. In his opinion, the battle was already decided. He even had to leave his homeland. He really did not know what good news there was to be happy about. Maori regularization did not care so much. He took the report from the frontline scouts and stood in front of Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He said excitedly, "Great General, I just received news that the 5-star army has withdrawn." What? Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who originally did not care, suddenly stood up. His eyes were wide open, and he had a look of disbelief. Say that again. Chapter 11:27. Great General, the 5-star army has retreated. Maori regularization repeated. Retreated? Haha, have they all retreated? Ashikaga Yoshimasa's face flushed red with excitement. No. Maori regularization explained. The 5-star army has only retreated 50,000 soldiers. Originally, Ashikaga Yoshimasa thought that the 5-star army had completely retreated. Now that he heard that only 50,000 soldiers had left, which was less than a quarter of the army, he excitedly sat back down. Then, he said with a dissatisfied tone, "Out of 200,000 soldiers, only 50,000 have left. Is there a need to be so happy? One must know that he only had 100,000 soldiers on land. Even if the other party retreated 50,000 soldiers, he still did not have the confidence to win." Maori regularization was startled for a moment. Then, he seemed to realize that he had said something wrong. He immediately took the initiative to explain, "Great General, although the 5-star army has only retreated 50,000 soldiers, the ones who left are all elites. There is the 4th Division of the Cold Vanguard Army, the powerful 1st Cavalry Division, and the New Army." Oh? When Ashikaga Yoshimasa calmed down and heard that it was these 3 divisions that had left, a hint of joy flashed across his face. However, he quickly regained his composure and said, "At this time, why did these 3 divisions suddenly leave? What is Bugnam of Gojoseon doing?" "I don't know." Maori regularization shook his head. How could he know about such a confidential matter? However, he knew that once these 3 divisions left, the pressure on the battlefield would be greatly reduced. When the opportunity was right, it was not impossible to turn defeat into victory. Although Ashikaga Yoshimasa was very curious about the whereabouts of these three divisions, he also knew that now was not the time to ask about it. Since the five-star army's strength was greatly reduced, he had to consider another matter, which was to turn the situation around. Very good. The five-star army has suddenly retreated. This is an opportunity for us. Humph. Do you really think that we are easy to bully? You actually dare to look down on this great general. At this crucial time, you actually retreated instead of increasing the number of soldiers. Good, good. Then let's show you who's the boss. Mao Lijun, take out the map. At this moment, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's face once again showed his usual domineering expression. He wanted to seize this opportunity to turn the situation around and win the war. If possible, he was afraid that he would even take back everything that he had lost. It was not impossible. After the two of them discussed for a while, they finally decided to counterattack and set their target on the Japanese army of the same race. That was the 120,000 Japanese army led by Sensei Naganobu and Fukada Tani. The originally declining Mashikaga Yoshimasa family was just struggling at death's door. Once Ashikaga Yoshimasa took over the military power, the Mashikaga Yoshimasa would not be able to do anything. It would not be long before the Mashikaga Yoshimasa took over some of the families and local forces. It would not be impossible for them to be completely wiped out. However, at this time, the five-star army appeared, and the war between the Japanese Empire began. The smart and insightful Sensei Naganobu took this opportunity to rise up and finally became the general trend. Now, not only did the Mashikaga Yoshimasa family regain their glory, but the number of soldiers under his command had also reached 80,000. If it was during peacetime, having such an army would be enough to make one a famous general. Even the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa would not dare to underestimate him. All of this was thanks to Yang Chendong. Especially after seeing the strength of the five-star army and the advanced weapons, Sensei Naganobu was even more impressed. At the same time, he was prepared to follow Yang Chendong to conquer the world and make contributions. Just like what he usually said when chatting with the other generals of the five-star army, he only had his eyes on the Japanese Empire. In the end, he was still too short-sighted. He wholeheartedly followed Yang Chendong and waited for the Japanese Empire's war to end. He wanted to see if there was an opportunity to enter Yang Chendong's eyes and then go on a campaign. Suddenly, the situation changed. The five-star army suddenly withdrew, and three strong armies left. This move really caught Sensei Naganobu off guard. Although he did not know where the five-star army went, he knew that since Yang Chendong gave the order, it must be carried out. However, when his gaze returned to the battlefield, he could not help but worry about his own situation. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was able to be the supreme general of the Japanese Empire for so many years, and even completely take over the imperial power. It was not only because of luck, but also because this person was very capable. Now that such a big hole had appeared on his side, he did not believe that the other party did not notice and would not take any measures. And without the three strong armies, would the five-star army still be able to win against the supreme general with an overwhelming advantage? Sensei Naganobu muttered in his heart. And there was another person who had the same thought, Fukada Tani. Unlike Sensei Naganobu, who took the initiative to join the five-star army, Fukada Tani was forced to do so by the situation. Before this, he had fought with the five-star army. Although he lost, he still gave the order to kill the people of the five-star army. So, even though he was also a general of the Japanese army, compared to the other party, his situation was not just a little bit worse. Originally, he thought that as long as he performed well and Ashikaga Yoshimasa was destroyed, Bugnam of Gojoseon would be in a good mood, and no one would look into his mistakes. But he did not think that the five-star army would withdraw 50,000 of their main forces, which made the originally certain victory situation become delicate again. It was now impossible to determine who would win and who would lose. This made Fukada Tani, who was originally nervous, feel a great sense of helplessness. And it was at this time that an old friend suddenly came to the military camp, an old friend that he did not expect. This person was dressed as an ordinary Japanese army soldier. When he suddenly appeared in Fukada Tani's tent, he was really shocked. Maori regularization. Why are you here? That's right. The person who came was Maori regularization, the general that Ashikaga Yoshimasa relied on the most. The reason why Maori regularization was able to come here was because of the discussion between him and the general. The two of them wanted to launch a counterattack when the five-star army's main forces withdrew. But considering that they did not have the advantage in terms of military strength, they decided to start with the five-star army. If they could find some spies and turn some generals to their own side, the military strength of both sides would have a fundamental change. At that time, winning the battle would not be impossible. After careful consideration, the two of them decided to target Fukada Tani. Although Fukada Tani's rebellion had caused the general to lose a lot of strength. But in this world, there were no eternal enemies, only eternal benefits. In order to achieve his goal, Ashikaga Yoshimasa decided to forgive Fukada Tani and give him a chance. Now that the target was decided, the general had to consider how to proceed. When Maori Misori took the initiative to stand up and express his willingness to accept and complete this mission, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was somewhat unwilling. This was the general that he relied on the most. If something were to happen to him, the loss would be too great. Ashikaga Yoshimasa did not immediately agree, which made Maori regularization feel very touched. Didn't this mean that the other party valued and cared about him? Because of this, he had to do this task well, so he said, "General, this mission has to be done by me. First of all, my identity is important enough. Only if I go can I dispel some of Fukada Tani's concerns and worries. Second of all, if something were to happen, it would be better for me to die than for the general to be in danger. So please agree to my request." It had to be said that Maori regularization's reason was very reasonable. With his status, it was indeed possible for him to prove his side's sincerity. And if Fukada Tani really did not want to betray the five-star army, taking down Maori regularization would indeed be a great achievement. The only thing that was worrying was that the risk was too high. However, Ashikaga Yoshimasa was a ruthless person after all. In his eyes, power was always the most important thing. Even if Maori regularization was loyal to him, he was just a subordinate that he could use. Since the other party was willing to take the risk and could bring him great benefits, he really had no reason to refuse. Well, since that's the case, Mao Li Jun, I'll leave everything to you. After saying this, Ashikaga Yoshimasa bowed solemnly to Maori regularization. Maori regularization hurriedly dodged, then said with a touched face, "General, with your words, even if I lose my life to Fukada Tani, so what?" Just like this, Maori regularization appeared in Fukada Tani's tent. Along the way, he had brought enough money. After a while of bribing, he finally appeared in front of Fukada Tani without attracting anyone's attention. Fukada Tani was very surprised by Maori regularization's sudden appearance. But after all, he was someone who had made a name for himself before. He quickly suppressed this shock in his heart. First, he looked outside the tent and found that everything was normal. When he saw that his personal guards were patrolling not too far away, he felt more confident. He said to Mao Li Zhengzi, "Mao Li Jun, I have to say that your courage is not small. You actually dared to appear here alone. Don't you know that as long as I shout, someone will quickly rush in and take your life? At that time, if I hand you over to the five-star army, it will definitely be a great achievement." Facing Fukada Tani's threat, Maori regularization first smiled, then lifted his robe and looked at Fukada Tani, who was a little nervous because of his actions, and said, "Kuin Fukada, as you can see, I didn't bring any weapons, so I can't pose any threat to you. So I still have a few words to say to you. If you still want to take me down after hearing them, then I have nothing to say." No threat at all. Fukada Tani let out a long sigh of relief, and his expression returned to normal. "Hee Mao Li Jun, you're quite brave. Good. With your boldness, this general will listen to what you have to say." Chapter 11:28. At this moment, Fukada Tani was a little relaxed and even a little happy, especially when he saw Maori regularization, who used to order him around, lower his head. His mood was very good. Because he was happy, a smile unconsciously appeared on his face, and all of this fell into Maori regularization's eyes, which made him unable to help but have a trace of hatred in his heart. He was not a person who would not lower his head. Just like when he faced General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, he often lowered his head. But to a villain like Fukada Tani, he was too unwilling. If it were not for the sake of this big plan, he would not have done this. And even if he did this, he secretly swore in his heart that once the plan succeeded, it would be the time for him to take Fukada Tani's life. Maori regularization thought with hatred in his heart, but on the surface, he lowered his head and said, "Kuin Fukada, this time I came here under the orders of the general. Please, for the sake of national justice, help the Japanese Empire fight back against the five-star army. No matter what, the Japanese Empire should be our Japanese Empire, and we should not let outsiders touch it. Otherwise, our future generations will curse us for the rest of their lives." Maori regularization still wanted to talk, but Fukada Tani said impatiently, "Japanese Empire is your Japanese Empire, not ours, right? What kind of person was Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and how much he thirsted for power as a former subordinate?" Fukada Tani knew very well, so there was naturally no problem with this question. "Fukada-kun, please wait for a moment. Let me finish my words." No one would be happy to have their words interrupted. If it were not for the situation, Maori regularization would have reprimanded him. "Humph." Fukada Tani snorted and turned his head to the side to express his dissatisfaction, but he didn't say anything else. Then, he continued to listen to Maori regularization. "Kuin Fukada, you asked a good question just now. I will answer this question now. In the future, the Japanese Empire will be our Japanese Empire. Regarding this matter, the Supreme General has already made a decision. Once he becomes the emperor in the future, he will make you the Supreme General. You will be in charge of the military affairs of the entire Japanese Empire." "Oh, that's right. Here's a letter written by the general himself. You can take a look." As he spoke, Mao Lijiang handed over a prepared letter. In order to show his respect, he even extended both of his hands to pass it over. Initially, Shun Tianya had a nonchalant and joking expression on his face. However, when he heard that he would be appointed as the great general, his expression suddenly froze. Then, he sat up straighter. Did the great general really say that? Of course. How could it be fake when it's written? If the Supreme General can't do it, Kuin Fukada can take out this letter and announce it to the world. The Maori regularization's tone was extremely firm. With the letter in hand, Fukada Tani opened it and read it carefully. When he found that what was written was exactly the same as what the Maori regularization said, his expression became more excited. All of this fell into the eyes of the Maori regularization. After he sneered in his heart, he continued to add, "That's right." In order to express his sincerity and thank Kuin Fukada for being so righteous, the Supreme General specially asked me to bring 500,000 taels of silver for you. Then, 500,000 taels of silver was sent to Fukada Tani. With power and money, no one would be able to resist such benefits. In addition, the Maori regularization continued to say, "Kuin Fukada, if this matter is successful, you will be the savior of the Japanese Empire. People will remember you for generations to come. This is an incomparably glorious matter." Yes, yes. Fukada Tani's face changed from a joking expression to one of surprise. He was smiling from ear to ear. At this moment, he really wanted to laugh 3 times to express his current feelings. But when he saw the Maori regularization standing in front of him very carefully, he suddenly came to a realization. His expression became very serious, and he said very seriously, "I have seen the Supreme General's sincerity. He is right. The matters of the Japanese Empire should be solved within the Japanese Empire. How can we let outsiders benefit? Since that is the case, I am willing to raise my troops to help the Supreme General." His words were dignified and even had a sense of justice, but both of them knew that this was just an excuse. Sure enough, money can solve everything. Seeing Fukada Tani's current performance, the Maori regularization laughed. Then, Fukada Tani's laughter also sounded. 8 hours later, when the sky was completely dark, the Maori regularization left. He brought Fukada Tani's promise and the plan that the two of them had discussed together. This was a good counterattack that Ashikaga Yoshimasa and the Maori regularization had thought of. They wanted to instigate Fukada Tani to rebel, and then make the center blossom. When the time came, they could suddenly send troops when the five-star army was in chaos. This way, they would be able to win this war with the momentum of the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. It had to be said that this idea was somewhat risky, but fortunately, they succeeded. Ashikaga Yoshimasa saw the Maori regularization again. After listening to his report, he couldn't help but slap his thigh in joy and say the word good 3 times. Good, that's great. Maoli Jun, did you discuss to launch a counterattack in 2 days? Yes, everything has been discussed. When the time comes, Fukada Tani will naturally make a move on Sensei Naganabu. Then, he will burn the provisions of the 5-star army. We will take advantage of this and attack. The Maori regularization said excitedly. Haha, very good. When the time comes, the position of Supreme General will naturally belong to Maoli Jun. As for that Fukada Tani, you should know what to do. Ashikaga Yoshimasa looked at the Maori regularization with satisfaction and said. A murderous look flashed in the eyes of the Maori regularization, and he immediately replied, Please rest assured, Supreme General, your subordinate naturally knows what to do. First, take the letter, then kill. It will be very clean. Ha, that's great. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's laughter once again resounded in the tent. Because the 5-star army's 3 strong armies had suddenly retreated from the battlefield, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was originally prepared to withdraw from the Japanese Empire, made a new decision. He wanted to shed blood. He wanted to win back everything that he had lost. Regarding this, the 5-star army on the other side didn't know about this. They still continued to do as they pleased, slowly pushing forward the battle line, slowly moving towards Musashi Prefecture. In the next 2 days, under the careful supervision of the 2 commanders, Tense and Kushueda, they took down another outlying county of Musashi Prefecture. They were one step closer to success. After a day of hurrying, the soldiers were a little tired. In the evening, they started to cook early. Other than the necessary sentries, the rest of the main forces went to sleep. They needed to accumulate enough strength for the next day. Compared to the silence of the 5-star army's camp, 10 li in front of them, 100,000 Japanese army was slowly approaching. The one leading the Japanese Empire's Supreme General, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and his deputy, Maori regularization. This time, all of the 100,000 soldiers were brought out. Clearly, they were prepared to go all out. This might be their last chance. If they won, they would rise again. If they lost, they would retreat. The 2 of them walked in the middle of the group. Their expressions were incomparably solemn. Before they saw the final result, their hearts were hanging high. The agreed time was getting closer and closer. The 2 of them were like defendants waiting to be judged by the judge. Their breathing became a lot heavier. Time passed by minute. Finally, the time that was supposed to come came. When it was midnight, the sound of battle cries could be heard from the distance. Then, flames soared into the sky, illuminating the horizon and turning it red. Haha, they finally made their move. Pass down my order, all troops attack. Supreme General, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, looked at the scene in front of him. Naturally, he was very excited. After a loud shout, the 100,000 Japanese Empire in front and behind him increased their speed and rushed straight ahead. At this time, the 5-star army's camp was in a mess. Corpses covered the ground. The smell of blood rushed to the nose and throat. There were military tents that were still burning. Fukada Tani, who was in full armor, was riding majestically on a tall horse and commanding the army. This time, he suddenly launched a night attack and caught Sensei Naganabu off guard. He killed thousands of people and captured countless people. He perfectly completed the mission given to him by the Supreme General. If there was a flaw, it would be that Sensei Naganabu used the chaos and the night to escape. But it didn't matter. He was just a stray dog. Fukada Tani didn't care about him at all. At this moment, he seemed to see the position of Supreme General getting closer and closer. It was almost within his reach. When Ashikaga Yoshimasa arrived with the army, he saw this scene. Seeing that the Supreme General had arrived, Shuntenya put away the smile on his face and stepped forward to report the results of the battle excitedly. His saliva was really scattered all over the sky. At this moment, Even if Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't like Fukada Tani, he had to admit that the other party still had some charm and ability. At least, he completed the mission very well. So after listening to everything, he patted Fukada Tani's shoulder and said, "Very good. The next Supreme General is you. Now, we have to follow up the victory and completely defeat the 5-star army. We have to take back everything that originally belonged to us. Yes, I am willing to be the vanguard and contribute to the new Japanese empire." As if he was infected, Fukada Tani once again took the initiative to ask for the order. "Good, then I will have to trouble Kuin Fukada." Ashikaga Yoshimasa nodded with satisfaction. Someone was willing to take the initiative to be the vanguard. That was really something to be happy about. Fukada Valley left, and he personally led his army of 50,000 to pursue the enemy. Behind him was Mori Masanori, who was also leading an army of 50,000. At the very back was Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who was leading an army of 50,000. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.